All right, I'm sure people will continue filling in. I know we have a lot to cover, so we should go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our CMFO Roundtable discussion, the first one of 2026. We're very happy to have you all here with us today. Thank you for taking the time to join our conversation and to our great group of panelists that we have here today who are going to share some really great information with you all. As you can see, we have a full agenda. Throughout this session, please submit your questions using the Q&A feature, and our moderators will address them either during the session or at the end. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. And I'll also be chiming in throughout with the polling questions for credit. So please just keep an eye out for those and make sure you complete them as we move along. With that, we will go ahead and get started. And I'm going to hand things over to John Reinhardt and John Mooney, who are going to moderate today's discussion. Thank you guys. Take it away.
Good morning, everybody. And like Katie had said, thank you all for joining us today. We have four really good topics with a bunch of great presenters, and we're looking forward to getting this first one of the year kicked off right. I know last year when we did the last one, if you were with us, we had what I thought was one of the most interactive experiences that we've ever had here with the roundtable. A lot of people asking questions, a lot of good discussion amongst the group for the roundtable. We encourage that. Anytime you have a question, please put it in the box so we can read it. John Reinhardt and I will be reviewing those questions as we go, keeping an eye on it and jumping in when there's a break in the presentation to answer those questions. So please feel free to do that. Feel free to reach out and hit us with any questions that you have. Katie will be doing a polling question like a couple, 20 minutes in or so. Just to make sure everybody's clicking on it and saying yes, they're here and paying attention. And we'll get the credit out to you as soon as we can. On behalf of Bud Jones, who I haven't seen pop on, but on behalf of Bud Jones, John Reinhardt, and myself, we really do appreciate you spending some time with us this morning and getting to learn a little bit of information on these topics. Without further ado, I'm going to kick it over to John Reinhardt, who's going to introduce our first speakers.
Hey, everyone. Excuse my voice, allergy season has kicked in. So our first group is the JCMI panel, which is the Joint Cash Management Investment Program, which was formed by the MEL. Our two panelists are Chuck Cuccia. Chuck is the current treasurer of the New Jersey Cyber Risk Management Fund. Some people know him as Charles, Chuck, Charlie, depends upon what stage of his life that you met him, that you have a different name for Chuck. He's Chuck to me. Chuck is a seasoned New Jersey public administrator and finance professional with extensive experience in municipal operations. He actually started his career off as an auditor first for Pete Marwick.
KPMG, yes.
KPMG. Chuck served for many years as the township administrator for Little Falls, as well as the CFO and QPA for Little Falls. He's been a JIF commissioner, a MEL commissioner, MEL commissioner, RCF, and EGIF. He retired from his role in Little Falls in 2024. Chuck also owned Treasury Services, providing financial and operational consulting to local governments, and previously served as a CFO in the borough of Saddle River. In his current role as the treasurer of the New Jersey Cyber Risk Management Fund, he oversees financial management and treasury operations, known for his deep expertise in public finance and governance. Chuck is respected for streamlining operations, strengthening community programs. Chuck and I also used to make wine together. So he's not just all business. Next, we have Tim on the line.
Tim is here.
So Tim Eismeier, actually, he's a new partner with NW Financial. Congratulations, Tim. Tim Eismeier is the seasoned municipal advisor and principal at NW Financial, where he has served since 2010. Actually, he runs the Austin, Texas office. He has structured billions of dollars in municipal bonds and notes, including a variety of complex financings such as redevelopment area bonds, lease revenue bonds, utility authority financings, and tax anticipation notes. Tim advises clients on debt issuance, budget planning, water and sewer analysis, rating agency correspondence, and major development-related projects and proposed financial reviews. He is recognized for his expertise in residential and commercial development financing, having guided dozens of redevelopment projects and long-term tax abatement agreements for municipalities. His work includes analyzing developer pro forma financial projections, preparing projections of pilot revenues and municipal school costs, and negotiating terms with developers on behalf of municipalities. Tim is also an aficionado of all the food in Austin, I know, because he made several suggestions and we joined him there. So with that, we can kick it off.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Katie's putting up the slide. Leave the first slide up, Katie. This conversation really starts back in 1986 when the commercial insurance market dropped out of New Jersey. We, as municipalities, needed someplace to go, and the impetus was there to start the joint insurance funds. And they say that all stories in the old days started once upon a time. Now they start according to the experts. So according to the experts, the New Jersey Joint Insurance Fund movement is the most successful pooled joint insurance fund program in the United States. Back in 1986, it started rather small, but over the years, we've moved to over 20 joint insurance funds. That includes property casualty as well as health insurance. From that, other shared services evolved, and in 1994, the Environmental Joint Insurance Fund was formed. In the 90s, the funds started to join together to do safety and training. Now we train probably 30,000 or 40,000 people, municipal employees each year. In 2023, the Cyber Insurance Fund was formed. Back in the earlier years, through the 90s, investments were done through the MEL, but each individual joint insurance fund had its own ability to create its own investments. And we were really restricted at that point in time to treasury notes. If you recall, back in the early 80s and 90s, the interest rates were rather robust, 7% in some cases. And it stayed that way until around 2008, where the bottom fell out and we were looking at 35 basis points for investments. During the Superstorm Sandy crisis in 2012, we learned that the joint insurance fund could work together joining together through all of the insurance funds to resolve claims in excess of our coverage limits. This was possible because we had done a lot of investments and banking together from the MEL as the lead agency. So this is basically a shared service program. In, I want to say 2008 or 9, we really started to talk about putting together a pooled investment program, more of a unitized trust. In California, they were successful in creating a unitized trust for their program. And we floated that idea to the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs and the Division of Banking and Insurance, where we were met with strong positive approach. A short while before we got that off the ground, the determination was made that the legislation was not permissive. So we had to go through the legislative process in order to create the Joint Cash Management and Insurance Fund. In 2012, in 2013, various versions of the legislation were drafted. And Katie, if you can go to the next slide, that would be great. And so here's our 9-year timeline in order to get to operational status.
Chuck, can I back you up a couple of years?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, you and I were on the investment committee. We floated an RFP for banking services because it was that time to do it. And when we put the RFP out, we put it out as traditional banking, just DDA, checking, and investment, and then combined. And then we said, hey, be creative. Is there anything else out there that we didn't think of? Mm-hmm. And at the time, the management side was a little frustrated with us because they said, well, that's not what we do. We said, so why not see what else is out there? So there's a little pushback, but we floated it out. And that's when Barry Van Cat, who was working for Wells Fargo, came back with a proposal from his team suggesting something similar to the Cal Trust.
Yes, that's very accurate, John. And the problem with that whole part of it, when we were structured before we created JCMI, this is what really happened. The mail would go out for a banking RFP, which included cash management and investments. And each individual joint insurance fund would have to sign on to that program. So you had one asset manager managing 19 different joint insurance funds. It was not very efficient. And it really became a question of liquidity. We learned through the Sandy claims that liquidity became more of an issue for each joint insurance fund because of the way those claims were handled and the length of time that they were handled. So trying to create some joint liquidity to allow more investments to be made in a more efficient manner was kind of where we wanted to go with this. And the only way to do that was to have a joint investment program. The legislation was adopted in 2018, is what you know now as the JCMI. The JCMI was established to have better ability to invest in allowable investments that we couldn't reach individually as each individual joint insurance fund. So now we get the legislation done and we start to work on the rules. The rules of the fund are in NJAC 5:38-1. Those rules were adopted in 2019. Thankfully, when we went to the Department of Community Affairs, Division of Local Government, they were very accepting of the rules that we had created. And in fact, I believe, if I recall correctly, John, that they thought we were a little bit too conservative with regard to those rules.
It was actually a joint meeting with Dobie and DLGS. It was Jason Martucci, and I don't remember who the person on the Dobie side was. But you're right. They said, you guys you're tying your hands. And Chuck's famous statement in that room was, say it, Chuck?
Return of investment is more important than return on investment. Because when you're dealing with taxpayer dollars, I don't want to lose any money.
And they love that statement. And that's what I don't think they tweaked our suggestions at all, did they?
I think slightly on the percentages. You'll see them in another slide coming up. But we wanted to make sure that we had the ability to reach all of the possible investments that were allowed in the legislature, which meant buying bond anticipation notes or bonds, other agency paper. And they were concerned, and we were also concerned, that the JCMI was not to turn into a loan program. It was not, and it is not a loan program for other government entities. We purchase investments that are issued by valid government agencies. And Tim will talk more about how that all happens when we get to that part.
John, I think it's important to remember that the original thought for that, the South Jersey HIF at the time, was cash poor. They had a run on claims. They were struggling for cash. And the thought was that we could be a financing tool for that other HIF. And that was a non-starter for both Dobie and for DLGS. They said, this is not how it was intended. They don't have the right, or they don't have the ability, how they were formed, to issue debt. Is that correct?
Correct. The only joint insurance fund that has the ability to issue debt in New Jersey is the Environmental Joint Insurance Fund, for obvious reasons. And thankfully, we haven't had any of those actions take place where we've had to do that. But in the late 90s, there was legislative change which allows municipalities, in case a joint insurance fund does have a deficit, when they have to raise additional assessments, to process them through special emergency. And you all know that when we have a special emergency, there's a possibility of having special emergency notes. Now, if that were to occur, it hasn't happened yet, the JCMI would be able to purchase notes because they were issued by a valid government agency. We're still in the formation stages, and COVID hits in, I want to say, 2018 and 19. And by the time everybody kind of got together and figured out that this was having a big impact on the financial market, we were ready to begin our investing. And no one was really sure about where the rates were going to go in the bond anticipation note market. Our first bond anticipation note that we purchased in 2020, I believe it was the borough of Ringwood. We were able to stabilize that market in an uncertain term because the standard bond anticipation note purchasers were looking for more money, which would have hurt the municipalities. In fact, I think, John, you had a conversation with the Division of Local Government with regard to that, and they asked us to jump into the market because we were now ready to go operational.
It was the division, and it was actually the governor's office, because they were trying to figure out how to stabilize everything.
So over the next 2 years, we started purchasing bond anticipation notes. And I know one of the comments from one of the other purchasers were, who are those guys? We've never seen them in the market before. We were successful in doing that, and we created a better return of investment for the joint insurance funds. Katie, can you go to the next slide?
As you're talking about that, we also measured what the cover bid was, which if we had not been there would have cost the towns, and what we were bidding, and we figured out the spread of what their savings were for the first year of the operation, if not more, longer.
Yes, and if I remember correctly, that number was somewhere between $3 and $5 million in savings.
It was a lot of money.
It was a lot of money.
And
just to give you
one more condition was you had to be a member of one of the member GIFs under the MEL.
Right. This is basically a hedge fund for the joint insurance funds. We really operate within that realm. While we do purchase bonds and notes of other entities, the real purpose is to maintain the investment program for the joint insurance funds and its members. So this slide shows you where we started and how we got going. The EGIF, the RCF, the MEL, the New Jersey SEM, and the Mr. HIF, which is the statewide health insurance fund umbrella program. Those are the original founding members. And we wanted to make sure that we were very, very conservative with regard to how we process and how we make decisions. Next slide, Katie. So here's the basis of the regulations that we had talked about earlier. And you can see that we're right in compliance with the investments that are allowed by local fiscal affairs law. And we continue to work within those parameters and the allocations. Next slide, Katie.
Before you move off the slide, we had talked about we were trying to avoid concentration risk in any area, which is why these percentages are here.
Right.
And if we breached those percentages, we had to come up with our own corrective action plan and file that with the division and with Dobie so that they knew that we were aware of it and correcting it. And that became part of our monthly report. Is it monthly? Yeah, monthly reports with the MEL.
Yes, that is true. We have not gotten to any of that at this point in time. We've stayed within our strategic allocations, and that's been successful for us. Go ahead, Katie. Okay, so this is the manner in which we make those decisions. NW is our financial advisor, and Eagle Management is our investment manager. You can see here that when we are buying from a bond anticipation note, NW develops the bid, and then it comes to the committee Interesting thing about the committee is that there are an even number of people on the committee. We wanted to make sure that in any investment decision that we made, we had a supermajority of our members to make that investment. So there are no ties. The tie goes to no action. The asset manager does the closing along with our financial advisor, and then we have an investment in place in our portfolio. Okay, Katie.
So Chuck, while we're on that, one of the original members was Mike Zambito.
Yes.
Mike was the most nervous person in the world with the investments, and we finally won him over when we started to see what was going on. But he was holding on to that. He didn't want to make any change.
It's very true, and the Fred Semrauer, our Mel attorney, said to John and I one day that the JCMI was appropriately named because it was John, Chuck, and Mike that really were worried about the investment process. Go ahead, Katie, change the slide. I think there's another one that shows the.
I have the PDF. Yeah, let me just pull that up. Here.
You also talk about how we made Pauline extremely nervous as well.
Yeah, that's true. So this is the monthly report that we get. This is the January 31st report. And you can see there that every month we report to the MEL and to the members what we have. So right now the pool is almost $350 million, an average maturity of 3.67 years, and a book yield of 2.84%, yield to maturity at 3.86. We used to be very strict on the process for holding maturities to the end. But with the market the way it's been, there have been some times where we've not done that, and we've sold and repurchased better, more lucrative investments. And I'd like to bring Tim in at this point in time and have him talk about how those things occur and where we are with the market.
We should also talk about we keep it as tight, or I say we, because I follow it. We kept the investments a little tight and short because the NAV, the longer you go out, the net asset valuation starts to get a little bit wonky.
Yes, and our projections on this really have to do with the NAV. We started at 10, that's the net asset value, and we are now at 10.7057. So we're maintaining it, and that's our guide to keep increasing the net asset value of the program.
That's important for the people here, because as that changes, we have to market for
Right.
reporting purposes. So you could theoretically show a loss, even though you haven't lost money, because the valuations have fluctuated.
Right. That's the mark-to-market accounting issue.
Because we're GAAP.
Because we are GAAP, as opposed to New Jersey municipalities, which are not GAAP. So Tim,
very good. Thank
can you? Okay. Do you?
Katie, do you have the presentation that I sent over to you as well?
Yes, I do. That was also PDF, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Morning, Tim.
Good morning, everyone.
So what's important to know, though, is Tim was the one who did all the pricing of the notes that we purchased. He got so good that the margin was so narrow. We were still beating the competition by like fractions of a percentage.
Yeah, and I was thinking back to 2020 when you and Chuck were describing that, and I just pulled up the numbers while you were going through it. And in 2020, we bought actually 55 individual bond anticipation notes with a total par amount of a little over $133 million. And it was just really sheer timing, I guess, that the exact time that we were ready to go as an entity to start making investments was, probably the least liquid municipal bond and note market that we've seen in an extremely long time. So it was an opportunity for the JCMI to, get fairly good returns on purchasing these notes, but also be of great assistance to a lot of issuers who were struggling to access the short-term markets at that time. And as another sort of just quick aside, since inception, so since I guess about 6 years ago, the Mel JCMI has purchased about $300 million in par amount of short-term notes for New Jersey issuers, and 85% of those are Mel members. So we can go to the next slide. So the reason this starts in 2023 is because the Mel's actually had two asset managers since the beginning. The current one, as Chuck mentioned, is Eagle Asset Management. And since we've started working with them, we've actually outperformed the market in terms of the various indices that are out there for similar funds. Basically, over a three-year period, the cumulative rate of return has been about 15%, and the annualized return is about 4.7% as compared to 4.3% for the benchmark for this type of a fund. Eagle has been a very good partner in all of this in terms of looking for the best opportunities we can find in terms of high yielding, but also safe and highly rated investments that are out there. We've combined sort of an approach of purchasing short-term notes, short-term treasuries and agencies, and looking at taxable municipal bonds where we can find them to generate the greatest return we can for the JCMI. Taxable bonds are relatively difficult to find in the market. They don't come up for sale in the secondary market all that often. But then when they do, it's certainly a very good opportunity for us. And short-term notes have been a big part of this too, because in the pre-Fed hiking of the rates environment, we were actually getting far better interest rates for the JCMI from tax-exempt short-term notes than were available from treasuries, even though those are taxable investments, just because of how low the rate environment was for that period of time. The script has flipped a little bit now as the one-year treasury, I think, is right around a 3.6 right now. So certainly the asset allocation has changed over the years to reflect changes in available investments and changes in the marketplace. We can go to the next page.
Hey, Tim, just before we move on, I'm just going to jump in with our first polling question.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, everyone should see this first poll. What is the primary purpose of JCMI? I'll leave this open for about 30 seconds and then share the results. Thanks, Tim. All right, about 10 more seconds. Okay. All right. Thank you.
So one of the things Chuck mentioned was I would say, sort of overall strategy of buying and holding and not looking to sell assets prior to their maturity, which I think is, that's probably a policy that's pretty widely adopted everywhere in terms of managing taxpayer dollars. Obviously, this has been an extraordinarily volatile market during the time that the Mel JCMI has been in existence. We went from, at the very beginning, a short period of time with very little liquidity and high jumps, significant increases in the rate environment, to then an extended period of time with an extraordinarily low interest rate environment, when the federal government was basically looking to prop up the economy during COVID. Um, so that 4.7% annualized return that we are uh, very happy to be generating now was actually closer to about 1.1% as of the of 2022, before the new asset manager came in and really before the Fed started hiking rates. So what that does is that huge amount of a swing in terms of where the prevailing interest rates are, created a lot of negative value in terms of some of the investments that we had purchased previously versus where interest rates are now. So to Chuck's point, we did look for a lot of, or as many strategic opportunities as we could to sell off some of those lower yielding, and in some cases longer duration securities in order to reinvest them at what were then much, much higher interest rates. So while that does have the negative aspect of realizing a previously unrealized loss, it's a repositioning that then allows you to get far greater rates over time, by removing those investments. And I don't want to sort of make it seem like that was sort of the entire portfolio that we did. It was probably more something in the range of 10 to $20 million, maybe a little bit more in terms of other trades we might have done. But it was basically looking to identify sort of the worst leftovers of the COVID era, once we kind of moved into the inflation and Fed hiking rates era. Um, so the Chuck went through kind of our process as far as looking to purchase New Jersey bond anticipation notes. As far as anything in the municipal bond market, whether it's in the purchasing notes in the primary market or secondary market opportunities, we are strictly limited to New Jersey paper. So we're not out there buying, bonds from issuers in other states. We are really only buying both tax exempt and taxable municipal investments for New Jersey issuers.
Tim, just talk a little bit about those small notes. Sometimes we try to help on the issues that are odd in the market, the ones that are a little bridge from note sale to bond sale, or they're small enough where the market's really going to take advantage of them. Because I think that's where we've helped quite a bit.
Sure. So yeah, we've purchased notes probably as large as $10 million. As we're looking at our asset allocation, obviously we can't purchase notes that are too large because one, we don't always have that cash available, but it also doesn't make sense to concentrate so much of the portfolio in one particular issue. But as Chuck alluded, we've purchased notes probably as small as $75,000 for certain towns, who otherwise might not get a lot of interest from the institutional investment world on something that small. There have been, in addition to the challenges in 2020, the short-term note market has changed quite a bit over the last few years, for a few reasons. One, I guess it was probably 3 years ago when the SEC sort of started coming down on underwriters for buying notes that did not have a POS or any type of documentation associated with them, which you are allowed to do, but it does fall within a certain safe harbor rules that they didn't believe underwriters were really following. So as a result of that, there's become much more of a premium placed on preparing a preliminary official statement for note issues, whereas in New Jersey, notes were hardly ever done with offering documents for decades. That's relevant to this discussion in the sense that preparing a POS, getting a rating, doing all that stuff is not always cost effective for certain types of issuers and for certain the size of certain notes. So it was a mutually beneficial opportunity for the JCMI to sort of come in and purchase those types of notes, which were either very small or didn't have, other types of disclosure, and also benefit those municipalities in the sense that they might not have gotten any other bids were it not for us, or the alternative bid might have been something, 50 to 100 basis points higher, depending on the situation. So again, I think that's really where we've kind of, in some ways, sort of settled into. As far as how we've looked to support New Jersey issuers through this program, is not necessarily bidding on every single note that comes available, because quite honestly, our our investment strategy doesn't always align with where the current market is for those tax exempt notes, and you as issuers may be able to get better rates just by doing a traditional note sale. But in a lot of cases, there are instances where either if it's a very small note or a note that where they don't want to do a POS or whatever it is, that's a real opportunity for us to work with that issuer to get a good rate for our portfolio and also benefit the municipality in question. We do have just kind of some representative examples over on the side here as far as, some yields that we're able to generate on. Some of these are agency securities. Some of these are taxable or otherwise municipals bought in the secondary market. And a couple of them, at least one of them I see on here, was a short-term note that we purchased as well. So I think we can go on to the next slide. So this is kind of another comparison to our portfolio versus the sort of industry or index breakdown for government bond funds. You can see that we have a far greater concentration in shorter term paper versus the typical bond fund, and that's intentional. We want, it's part of our strategy of being flexible, also limiting duration risk, particularly given some of the issues I mentioned previously in COVID, when we were, maybe had 5, 6, 7 year paper that all of a sudden wasn't yielding what it was compared to the market. But in general, as you look at the rest of the durations, and by the way, we're limited to 10 years, so that's why for municipal bonds, so that's why it doesn't go out much further than that. We're fairly in line with the duration of the index as you look at really kind of years 3 through 8. So the main primary difference, I guess you'll see, in terms of when you look at these sector weights on the side, those types of funds typically are heavily invested in U.S. Treasuries. We feel like we have a pretty good mix of agencies, municipals, treasuries. The cash is really what we kind of keep available in a money market to allow for, one, the type of instance I mentioned where a municipality might come to us with with a short-term note, so we have cash to do that. But also, obviously, there are instances where some of the underlying GIFs may need funds for some reason. If they have to take out their cash, we want to make sure we're not putting ourselves in a bad position and having to sell off, tons of securities in order to do that. We can go to the next slide. So, I think this is sort of what Eagle and I looked at as far as just seeing what the market outlook is. I feel like I've said the word volatile or volatility probably 200 times in the last 5 years. And while the market is, more stable than it was, when we started this 6 years ago, world events always have their impact, and, we're still dealing with inflation. We've got, wars sort of on multiple fronts in the world out there right now, which always has an impact on the market and interest rates. So again, managing that volatility has been sort of one of our primary goals since the beginning of this. We're still looking to focus on high quality investments, whether it's, I would say the vast majority of the portfolio is invested in AA and AAA securities. And again, I think that's really what our focus is sort of being opportunistic in terms of identifying eligible securities that give us a good rate of return while also maintaining that very high credit quality, while also giving ourselves the ability to be active in the short-term bond anticipation note market as it aligns with our objectives. And I believe that is the last slide. So I think with that, unless Chuck had anything he wanted to add, or I think we could make ourselves available for questions from the group.
I think Katie had another question that she was going to
Sure.
submit.
Yes, I'll do the last poll here.
Tim and Chuck, I think it's important to note, because I don't know if we glossed over this at the beginning, the original intent of the JCMI was because every individual JIF was keeping liquid funds ready to pay claims. And if you think about how many JIFs are there out there?
Well, 19 that we started with.
So each one of the 19 were keeping a significant amount of money liquid, which was not earning as much as they could have. So we pooled the liquidity pool to satisfy claim payments, which is why those investments are short, to replenish the pool as it's being used and then reinvest those available funds. So it was laddered to meet those cash flow needs.
Yeah, I'm sorry, John, go ahead. Finish it.
By shrinking the collective liquidity pool, we were still able to pay claims, but we were able to invest much more in something at a higher yield, which is what the benefit was.
Correct. And in doing that, what we had to do is we had to create some guardrails. So the minimum investment that a JIF can make into the JCMI is $500,000. And when they decide when they need the money and they need to take it out, we do it based upon a monthly net asset value calculation, which, Tim, I think occurs like on the 8th of every month or some date close to the 1st.
Yeah, I think we just got the February one last week, which had the total market value of the portfolio around $346 million.
So there are some restrictions, like there is in any pooled investment program, a hedge fund. So that also helps us manage the dollars that are given to us. And when Tim was speaking about making investments in municipalities, the thing that we couldn't do, even though those investments were available to us before we joined together, was because you had to worry about liquidity in each individual fund, and you couldn't put together enough investment dollars on your own to take advantage of those investments. So this has really brought together the possibility and the best way for us to invest those joint insurance fund money.
I'm just going to go ahead and launch that last poll on this topic. Okay, so you guys should see that now. If anyone doesn't see the polling question, feel free to email me your response or chat us if you're having a problem. Question is, how familiar were you with the JCMI program before today's session? And I'll share the results in a few seconds.
We set a record. There's 101 attendees today.
Yeah, might be. All right. All right, want to make sure everyone gets their credit. Okay.
Chuck, back to your point about the committee being a 4-member committee. I know we got some pushback initially saying, are we crazy? Why would you want an even number of people? And that was just the point, to make it ultra conservative so that a tie was a no.
Mm-hmm.
So that polling was interesting. Not very many people were familiar with the JCMI.
You know what? I wonder how many of these people watching are part of the Mel Network. That might influence why they did or did not know.
Thank you very much, everyone.
So we probably mentioned that towns cannot invest in this, but what can towns do? How can they improve their returns?
Well, from my perspective, I think, and this is probably something CFOs are seeing, every day, is making sure you're getting the correct rate from your bank in terms of the rate on your money. I think that's less of an issue now than it was as we were kind of just coming out of the low interest rate world of COVID. But I think a lot of banks were very slow to increase their rates as the market adjusted. But certainly if you're getting probably anything less than 2.5, 2%, that's below market in terms of what banks are offering. And you should really be probably looking more in that kind of 3-4% as far as a rate on your money. We have done sort of, I wouldn't say exactly the same type of setup because the JCMI is unique. But municipalities do have the availability to invest their money, whether it's through the various state opportunities that are out there, or working directly with an asset manager or an advisor who can assist in purchasing treasuries and things like that. Obviously, those are all eligible investments. Municipalities can buy short-term notes, and other government entities can buy short-term notes as well. But kind of given what Chuck mentioned, that's a little bit more of a challenge for your individual municipality, just because you're not working with all the money in the world to have a kind of diverse, safe portfolio. But we have, as I said, we have worked with other municipalities at the local level in a similar fashion, but obviously with a much lower overall market value in terms of the portfolio. So yeah, there are opportunities. I mean, right now the treasury rates are not where they were when we were at the sort of, I don't know if they were the all-time highs, but certainly all-time highs in the last 25, 30 years. But you can still get a pretty good rate of return on with the various kind of federal instruments that are available, whether it's sort of in that sort of 3.5 to 4% range, depending how far out you want to go.
So, John, Chuck, Carolyn, you guys are all CFOs, and Tim also. So how would you suggest a town start? When I start talking to a town, I always tell them they should know and understand their cash flow as a beginning point. What do you guys do?
I think one of the things that have come through with regard to banking is the ability to sweep at night and go into one of the new investment programs that are available at the banks. I'm pretty sure John is doing that at the county. At this point, I started when I was in Little Falls doing it, and that improved our interest rates quite a bit.
We don't sweep, but we negotiate with the banks on a daily basis. We ladder out CDs. Sometimes we just park the money and we guarantee we're not going to move it and we get the same rate. That way it's still liquid, but we give them a guarantee that it will not move and they can lend it out. Because obviously the banks make money. It's the difference between what they lend at and what they give us back. It's the net interest margin.
Mm-hmm.
I actually want to go back to one. I remember looking at my notes. We were down at the division or DCA at one point talking about the program in the very beginning. And it was one of the people from DCA said, "Why do you have so much money?" And we realized that she didn't understand our business. I mean, the reason that the GIFs are sitting on so much money is claims have a long tail to pay out. The duration could be upwards of 10, 15 years, depending upon the nature of the claim and what happened.
Sure.
So that's why we have the money. And essentially the fund balance for a GIF is less the case reserves, which are the known estimated reserves, plus the IBNR, which is the incurred but not reported, which is an actuarial guess at what may still be out there. You take those two away from that available net position, and that's where all the cash is.
Right. And on the health insurance side, you need the cash ahead of time because of the speed at which claims get paid.
I don't see any questions. Well, Chuck and Tim, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
But do you want to break now or you want to do one more and then break?
Up to you guys.
Let's do one more.
One more.
That was a perfect 50 minutes. The next panel we have is the Affordable Housing Panel. In that panel, we have Mayor Mike Stanzilis. Mike is the mayor of the borough of Mount Arlington. Mike has served as the mayor of Mount Arlington since 2016. He followed Art Ondish and is recognized for his leadership in fiscal management, strategic growth, innovation in government. Mike is also famous for saying he has the race to the bottom, and I'll let him explain that when he comes on. Prior to being elected mayor, he served 2 terms on the Borough Council as chairman and was chairman of the Mount Arlington Land Use Board. He is the vice president of the New Jersey Conference of Mayors, member of its executive board, and immediate past president of the Morris County League of Municipalities. As mayor, he has focused on prudent fiscal stewardship, lowering taxes, expanding shared services, and strengthening long-term planning. His leadership has supported key initiatives, including preserving teacher positions during school funding challenges, expanding water and sewer service, and advancing plans for a new public safety and community center complex. In addition to his public service, he is a statewide leader in the responsible use of artificial intelligence in government and the founder of Arlington Analytics, LLC, a public sector consulting firm specializing in AI strategy implementation, and workflow transformation. He's a Mount Arlington resident since 2002. He maintains a long-standing commitment to community service. What you might not know about Mike is also a member of a mayor's band. He plays bass. Little known fact. Mike and I actually had climbed Mount Washington once before together. And this summer we're planning on doing it again, but we're adding Mount Katahdin to that list to see if we can do 2 mountains in the same week. Welcome, Mike. The next panelist is Carolyn Rinaldi. She is the Borough Administrator, CFO, and QPA for the Borough of Mount Arlington. She actually started off as the records clerk for the police department. Is that correct?
That's correct.
It was. That is correct. Carolyn Rinaldi has served in municipal government with the Borough of Mount Arlington for more than 28 years. Obviously, she started when she was 10. Since 2011, she has held the roles of Borough Administrator, Chief Financial Officer, and QPA. Carolyn is the president of the New Jersey chapter of PRIMA, supporting education and leadership in public risk management. And we just had a seminar yesterday. She also serves as a commissioner and executive committee member of the Morris County Municipal Joint Insurance Fund. She is a past president. Known for her experience in steady leadership, she plays a key role in municipal budgeting, operations, and strategic planning. So I first met Carolyn as a student in the CFO program, where she showed up. I think she just had surgery and she was barely awake, trying not to pass out. She took the exam and she passed. Carolyn and I have collectively together negotiated several shared service agreements. I think we've done them well. Next up is Matt Jessup here.
I am, John. Can you see me?
Matt, everybody knows Matt.
Oh boy, this can't be good.
Matt.
Good morning, John. How are you?
Matt is a scratch golfer. If you ever play with Matt, he's got that natural swing. So Matt is an experienced attorney with McManimon, Scotland, and Baumann, where he focuses on municipal and public sector law. He advises local governments, authorities, and public agencies on governance, contracts, redevelopment, and regulatory compliance. Matt's work supports municipalities in operating transparently and efficiently while navigating complex legal requirements. He is known for his practical, solutions-oriented approach to helping communities manage development, finance, and operational issues. His guidance plays an important role in supporting sound decision-making for New Jersey municipalities. I know I always call Matt, sometimes with some harebrained ideas, and you laugh at me, but he's always there to help.
I like the challenge, John.
The next panelist is Jessica Caldwell. Jessica is the founder and principal planner of J. Caldwell Associates, a Northern New Jersey firm specializing in community planning and land use services, and she's located in Newton, New Jersey. With more than 20 years of experience, she has led master plans, redevelopment projects, and strategic planning initiatives for municipalities across the region. She has a specialty in affordable housing and is representing 20 communities in the Round 4 process. Jessica also teaches certification courses for planning and zoning board members through Rutgers University, helping to strengthen planning practices statewide. Funny story about Jessica, though, is after the Mount Arlington reorg meeting many years ago, Wharton was looking for a new planner. She and I sit in the bar, just having a nice casual conversation. I interviewed her. She didn't realize I was interviewing her. So then when she finally got invited to Wharton, I had to admit, I said, Jessica, I said, it's a little unfair because I already interviewed you. It was a
That's funny.
moment.
Yeah, I remember that. Yep. Good times.
So with that, you guys are ready.
Okay. Thanks, John. And we have a PowerPoint I'm going to start that we're all going to use as a guide for our presentation today. We're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, affordable housing. Let me just start it up. So, planning for affordable housing in New Jersey, and we're talking about the fourth round. We'll just give a little background here on where affordable housing came from and why we're here. So the New Jersey Supreme Court decided a case called Mount Laurel in 1975, which is primarily an exclusionary zoning case, which said that communities aren't permitted to not have zoning that would allow for all types of housing. It was kind of a basic type of case, but then has obviously evolved over the years. Then there was Mount Laurel 2 in 1983 that evolved that question into actual affordable housing, that not only did communities have to provide for various types of zoning for all types of housing, but also part of that housing had to be affordable housing. So the first rounds of affordable housing, it really started in 1987 through 1999 is what you know as your prior rounds. And that really came out of the New Jersey Fair Housing Act, which was adopted in 1985, which created COA as an administrative agency to try to move affordable housing requirements and obligations and the ability for municipalities to meet those out of the courts and into an administrative function. So COA is the Council on Affordable Housing. So we went through rounds 1 and 2 through 1999. And then round 3 came and COA adopted rules which were known as gross share rules in December 2004. So they were a little late on that. And the third round became quite a long process. And that's in part because those gross share rules were challenged in court. And the appellate division decided that they needed to be refined in 2007 and that COA needed to issue new rules, and they halted certifications. So everyone kind of went on hold in terms of municipal certifications before COA. And then in October 2010, the appellate division had another case which overturned gross share methodology and basically determined that it was invalid at that time, and then ordered COA to come up with new rules based on the first and second round rules. So also on September 13th, the Supreme Court affirmed the appellate division's 2010 decision and then remanded to COA to undertake those rules. As you may remember, that this was during the Christie administration, and COA was not, he was not a big fan of COA and did not appoint new members to COA during that time, so that the third round rules were actually never adopted. They were drafted. There were 6 members on the board at the time. And then when the new rules went up for a vote, they were voted on 3-3 and essentially failed without a majority. And so in 2015, there was a decision known as Mount Laurel 4, which essentially took away COA's ability to, as the administrative arm of affordable housing, and moved it back into the courts, and then appointed Mount Laurel judges for each judicial vicinage, And all communities were told that they needed to submit. I think it was sometime in July of 2015, all communities had to submit to the courts in order to maintain their immunity for round three. So round three ended up going from 1999 to 2025. So that became quite a long haul for communities, and many communities were only certified, between that 2015, that 2020 timeframe. So fast forward to 2024, and the New Jersey legislature adopted amendments to the Fair Housing Act. And those amendments set up what the fourth round was going to be. And they finally replaced COA, abolished it. It was sort of their barely functioning format up until then. And they created what's called the Affordable Housing Dispute Resolution Program, along with various deadlines that we'll get into a little bit more today. If Matt or Carolyn or Mike have anything else to add to that fun history?
No, it just was interesting to see anything that got developed during that period. And round three wasn't always having any inclusionary or affordable housing all around. So
Yeah, you can see why, because you had that period essentially from 2007 almost to 2015 where COA was not really functioning. So many communities were really wondering, what the heck is going on? Is this really going to still continue? Do we have an obligation? If so, what is it? Or do we just keep going on as usual? It was really a great, gray area, great period of time. Matt, you had something you wanted to mention?
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right, great. So what are the implications of not complying with affordable housing? So everyone knows about this, dreaded builder's remedy lawsuit. It's really the loss of the ability to control your zoning, because once you come under fire in an exclusionary zoning lawsuit, you really lose the ability to have any kind of upper hand on what your zoning might be for whatever any builder might be determining that they can build something on. And so densities increase dramatically, heights, all those types of things. Even though it may seem like when we're in the process, you also have densities and heights increasing. But I guess the one, lesson from that is it can always be more somehow. So, that's really the threat and why communities are involved.
And Jessica, it's real, right? I mean, we've seen examples where, the municipality says, "Oh, it's fine, we'll figure it out," and then you end up in a builder's remedy lawsuit, and the municipality's going, "Well, wait, but I don't want more than 4 stories." It's like, well, that ship has sailed. If they need 7 to get this project done, they're going to get 7. And well, we have, facade standards and color palettes, and we want to be, architecturally this way, like the rest of the town is, and those things sort of all go out the window, yet alone, what about our water infrastructure, our sewer infrastructure? We don't have the parking. We don't have the. It's hard to believe. I really appreciate that, but all of that stuff just goes out the window, and the developer largely is going to have the ability to do what they want. So if it's inevitable, which it is, that these projects are going to get built, you might as well maintain as much. I think the key word Jessica said is control. That's really, from my perspective, the key focus on all of this. Keep as much control as possible. You're doing it in the spirit of negotiation. You'll find a point that isn't what they want, may not be exactly what you want either, but it's going to be a lot better than if you end up doing this through a builder's remedy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that the way you said it, as if it's going to happen anyway, because I mean, once you get that lawsuit, it's too late. So you can't go back and say, "Oh, well, no, we're going to comply now," So that's, it is a real threat, and that's why you'll see we've had sort of remarkable participation in this round. So March 20th, 2024, Governor Murphy signed PL 2024, Chapter 2, the amended Fair Housing Act. which abolished COA, established a dispute resolution program, and really changed how we're addressing affordable housing during this fourth round. And as you'll see, it's also established a crazy schedule trying to kill all planners and attorneys in the state. So at least that's my opinion.
Two more
So
days, Jess. 2 more days.
yeah, I know it's kind of almost over. Maybe we'll see. So court-based oversight. The dispute resolution program has Mount Laurel judges, a lot of retired Mount Laurel judges, brought them back for another fun round of review of affordable housing. So there are various judges put on several cases, and it was kind of like a mediation program. The communities, though, although we thought from reviewing the initial Fair Housing Act that it was going to be more of an administrative type of function, it became more of a judicial function, and that municipalities had to file declaratory judgment actions through Superior Court. And any of these disputes and challenges were mediated by the program in very short timeframes, which made it very interesting. And then program judges kind of issue orders, but then it goes to that Mount Laurel judge to make the final decision, which also kind of makes it interesting. And then, so the rules have started, and they came up with some administrative directive rules through the courts. And some of those held, and some of them didn't. But the housing element and fair share plan is really the main item that guides the program. So we had all these crazy deadlines, or we'll call them milestones. So the Fair Housing Act had DCA, or the Department of Community Affairs, issue fourth round obligations. Those came out in October of 2024. And then municipalities had this process where they could either take the DCA obligation or come up with their own obligation. So that was a fun and interesting process where the communities, every community had to, by January 31st, either determine that they were taking DCA's obligation if we reviewed it, or come up with your own obligation. So I know in Mount Arlington, we accepted DCA's obligation because we were kind of one of the fortunate communities that got a reasonable obligation. So that was kind of nice because we avoided the issue of having to challenge the obligation and go through a kind of crazy process and working between DCA and Fair Share Housing Center.
Jessica, I think one of the odd things about the statute a little bit is that even if you did accept DCA's number, that didn't mean that it wasn't subject to challenge by a third party, right? So you kind of would have thought instinctively, well, the state starts this by telling us what our number is. If we just say yes, that should be it. We should be done. But Fair Share Housing Center and or a developer and or an advocacy group for, construction contractors, et cetera, still had the ability, and in many cases did, challenge what is essentially DCA's number. So creating a little more work and I guess strife in the process than maybe was necessary. I'm also kind of wondering, just anecdotally from your perspective, how many towns challenged versus accepted? Talking to you all, the planners, it seemed like there was a healthy mix of we challenged because the number was way too high, or we thought it should be 20 less, so it's not worth it, or we thought it should be 20 more, so we're definitely running for the hills to try and get this number approved.
Yeah, so I would say it was about 50-50 for my communities, and really hinged on, there were kind of three main factors of how the obligations were determined. And one, there was like income, and then one was land, and then one was based on your region and employment and how much commercial development you've created in your community. So the land factor capacity was really the one factor that a lot of communities objected to, because as always, when you're determining these things at a state level, it was the kind of classic round three, where everyone was saying, "Oh, the highway medians are in our land capacity," and that it was the same type of thing, or open space that they didn't know the town purchased it, so all of a sudden there's 20 acres of open space being counted towards your land capacity. And you look at that as a community and you're like, hey, well, that adds up to like another 100 units. Maybe we should challenge this. This is wrong. So, but then, yes, we got into the situation where, we have the builders objected to almost any community that didn't accept their number. Fair Share objected to pretty much every community that didn't accept their number. And then, you get to, I have one, and Mike and Carolyn know everyone over in Jefferson Township, where our big joke is, they had us an island in Lake Hopatcong that is only accessible by boat. And Fair Share Housing Center would not let us take it out of our land capacity factor. So it was just kind of, we're like, okay, so a helipad, what are we doing here, people? It's just kind of, I don't know, Mayor Mike, what you
Yeah,
thought about that, but
totally ridiculous. When the lake freezes over, there's no accessibility unless you take a snowmobile or, the danger. But, affordable housing on an island that's only accessible by boat. It really goes to the underlying lunacy of a lot of what this is predicated upon, and sort of the faulty nature of how it's structured. And I won't get too far into that because we're here to learn about all the little deadlines and things of that nature. But that's not an uncommon example. A little
yeah,
strip of land here and there, all throughout the state. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So then communities had to file their declaratory judgment by February 3rd. Um, and a lot of communities did. So prospective need, how was it calculated? We talked about that a little bit. Needs were calculated by region. They used the old COA regions. So you can see the map here to the right, showing regions 1, 2, and 3. 1 is Sussex, Passaic, Bergen, and Hudson, and 2 is Warren, Morris, Essex, and Union, and 3 is Hunterdon, Somerset, and Middlesex. So you have 6 regions throughout the state, just kind of going across the state, and then they sort of average, and everything gets lumped in terms of income in that region, and then household land available, household income, and jobs and employment is what was the basis for the obligation. And then the calculations, started out with, because what they give you is what's called your regional need. So they put it across each region, and it's kind of like, what do you start out with? And they started out with almost 85,000 units as the determination for what needed to be distributed across the state. And that was basically determined on how much growth happened during round 3. And then they basically took 40% of that and said that needs to be affordable housing for round 4. I don't know why that number was used and why it was 40%, not 20% or 30%, or, but that's what we ended up with. And I think that's why when you look and you say, why are these numbers so high? This is just kind of crazy, because a lot of communities got really high numbers, and that's because your starting number was high. And so, for instance, Region 1, 27,743 units had to be distributed throughout all of those municipalities. And then Region 2, where Mount Arlington is, and Morris County had 20,506 units that had to get distributed to all those communities. And it doesn't matter if you're rural or you have water and sewer or not, everyone gets their fair share.
Yes, this may be getting ahead of ourselves. I'm not sure, but how does it, so 20,000 for Region 2, but now Municipality X says, oh, my number's down by 100, and you have multiples of those. Do those get reallocated? Do they just become unmet need in round 5 because you can't constantly be changing the number as each town settles? So where does that ultimately land? Do we know?
Yeah, there were a lot of questions about that because some communities, challenged it and were able to get lower numbers. Some communities didn't, but there was a big question, are we going to reallocate those units? And that never did occur. And then not only that, the initial decision of what your number is, but you're absolutely right, Matt, that you have these vacant land adjustments or other adjustments for lack of water and sewer, and communities kind of put to the side, and we'll talk about, the way Mount Arlington did it. You put to the side some of those units and they may never get built, or at least not during the round 4 period. So, I mean, that's why I think maybe they start, really high, is because a lot of the units kind of fall away during the process, and so maybe if you start at 40%, maybe you end up with 20% of the units that end up getting built. So this is our sample 4th round crediting and bonus framework. So the affordable housing is always sort of hyper bureaucratic in a way that we have all these different sort of not only our obligations, but then how we meet them. So we have also what's called present need, which we don't talk about as much because it's a little easier to address. Present need is a rehabilitation need, and that's essentially communities have to start rehabilitation programs, or they work with their counties to do that. In Morris County, we have a really good rehabilitation program. And so Mount Arlington had an obligation of 38 units. We essentially, work mostly with the county on that. We also have some funding available in the community. And if a lower moderate income household needs to replace a furnace or a roof or something like that, we have funding and the ability to do that. The prospective need is what everyone's kind of concerned about, and that's the new unit requirement. Mount Arlington's was 60. As I said, that was a relatively low number. I mean, we had communities in Morris County that had 1,200. So 60, we thought that was pretty good. We can handle that. So then within those units, you have like maxes and minimums of everything. So you have a maximum number of bonus credits of 25%. So you can apply your bonuses, and then you end up with sort of a net new units, minimum family units of 50%, minimum rental units of 25%. Minimum family rental have to be 50% of the rental. As you can see, it gets very complicated. Minimum low, moderate income split, it has to go 50% low, 50% moderate. And of the low, you need 13% very low income. You had a maximum age restricted units of 30%. And then there's a maximum sort of bonuses you can take with the age restrictions.
Jessica, just a quick comment on this. As I get a chance to talk to other mayors all around the state, well, some of the first things you go, what was your number? What was your number? I'm almost embarrassed to say our number because we did so well. But that didn't happen by accident. Over the course of many years, 1, 2, 3, and 4 rounds, we surround ourselves with amazing professionals like Jessica, Carolyn, our CFO, our administrator, and Matt Jessup, who, and as Matt said earlier, we worked with developers over the years, and we've used the redevelopment as a tool. So we haven't, knock on wood, had a builder's remedy shoved down our throat. it's a compromise, which is a good, a good term. People are afraid to use the word compromise, but our numbers came out, I'd say, remarkably better than our peers because of we've worked with COA and with developers throughout the years and surrounded ourselves with great people like Jessica, Matt, and Carolyn.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, I do agree. I mean, I always advocate for communities to, if you do it little by little and comply over time, the pain is less. And then, somehow if it does feel like communities that are complying over time end up with lower numbers in the future, whereas those that are fighting it all along, they tend to end up with more difficulties.
I think just to elaborate on that a little bit, Jessica, back to what the mayor was saying too, and thank you, Mayor, but I agree. I always tell everybody, you surround yourself with professionals like Jessica and like Matt. But I think there's a little bit of a look back concept to the fourth round too, and what the mayor was talking about. At one point, up until 2015, right, we weren't really sure where we were at. There was nothing definitive with third round, but one of the steps that Mount Arlington took at the time, which is not so simple right now, was to do the extension on the existing units that we had in Seasons Glen. So to your point, there was some active participation along the way, managing this, maintaining the redevelopment plans that we've had along the way. So I think that bode well for us going into the fourth round. And then I think that helped more when we got to the point with the hearings and the challenges with fair share, that we could point to those decisions that were made in the last few years.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you did that during a time where we didn't know what was going to happen, but we'll talk about extensions of controls, but if you have existing units and you extend controls, they kind of become like new units. So that was putting something in the bank, so to speak, for the future, which was really smart.
Hey, Jessica, just before we move on, I'm going to launch the first poll for this topic.
Okay.
Okay, everyone should see this first polling question. How much experience do you have working with affordable housing issues? I'll leave this open and share the results in a minute or so. All right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the results. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I know we're going to get into a little bit of the financial stuff where Carolyn can help us, think about how this impacts the CMFOs. That, it's not something you get involved in probably as much, but it's certainly good to know about, especially now we're in implementation phases or getting into implementation phases.
Yeah, just quickly on the CMFO, you don't get to do it all the time, but man, it's got a 30-year impact. So that, be prepared. Yeah.
For sure. So, what kind of compliance mechanisms do we have for affordable housing? So, the big ones, inclusionary zoning. That means zoning that is higher density so that it allows for a developer to be able to afford to build a percentage of affordable housing. So now it seems like the new set aside is 20%. And then redevelopment areas, same type of thing, but we're doing it over areas that's already built. And interestingly enough, you can't really create an inclusionary zone over an existing built area without a redevelopment area, because an inclusionary zone has to be considered a realistic opportunity. So you need that extra benefit of redevelopment and the tools available in order to say if the site's existing developed, that it can become what you're proposing that it would be in terms of housing, an inclusionary housing development.
And Jessica, I would just jump in and add with respect to redevelopment versus just doing it as inclusionary zoning. Your ordinance sets up the zoning for the property. Developer files a site plan application. They go build in accordance with the zoning. Redevelopment area offers, and redevelopment law offers broader powers, right? So if you're considering a payment in lieu of tax, which I think we'll probably talk about later, right? A 30-year or less, but presumably a 30-year pilot shifts a lot of new revenue to the municipality, right? Into the municipal budget in particular. If you need significant infrastructure, right? Particularly we see it in rural areas where you're trying to build new housing in areas that maybe don't have a water sewer and need that connection, then a pilot financed by long-term bonds is a mechanism to allow you to provide that infrastructure in order to bring the project, get the project built. And then you also have the circumstance where you may just need something else out of the developer contribution. The classic example is always the fire truck, right? In the inclusionary zoning context, I can't ask for a fire truck from the developer, even though they're going to build the first 7-story building in town, and I don't have a ladder that goes 7 stories. But in the redevelopment context, you do have that power. So it kind of depends on the circumstance, but the redevelopment area provides a lot more opportunities for a municipality in connection with the development of the project.
Yeah, and with this rush process, a lot of communities that I work with felt more comfortable going with redevelopment because they do have a little bit more control, so it was like, all right, we're rushing through this, but we know since we're doing redevelopment that we're going to be able to kind of work out the finer details as we go and deal with things like whatever financial implications might be coming down the pike. As we mentioned, the extensions of expiring controls. So if you had an existing, especially now that we're like 40 years into affordable housing, there's existing affordable housing developments. And like Mount Arlington did, if you have units that the affordability controls are expiring on, those could be renewed. So they'd have to be expiring during the round 4 period so by July 1, 2035. Group homes and supportive living opportunities, those count for credits. Assisted living and some affordable senior housing count for credits. Communities look to do 100% affordable housing or municipally sponsored housing. And that's often done through low-income housing tax credits that we'll talk about a little bit more. Accessory dwelling units is another type of program. And then there's opportunities for bonuses that we'll talk about that kind of help to bolster all of these mechanisms. So communities can also do what's called a vacant land adjustment, which is what Mount Arlington did. And that's really, especially now, if you think about it, a lot of communities are fully built out now. There's not any vacant land sitting around that you can put the inclusionary zone on. And like I said, unless you're doing redevelopment, you can't zone existing developed land. So the vacant land adjustment can reduce your obligation, and you basically look at the entire municipality and find out, what land you have available. And while you might have vacant land, it may not be the land you necessarily want to zone. So that's another thing to think of is you might look at your vacant land, but then say, we're going to do redevelopment, even though we have a little bit of vacant land, because that is just not a reasonable location. It's the middle of, a single family neighborhood and the roads are bad or what have you. So then you basically come up with, how much land is available, and then create, sort of fake zoning for that and figure out, well, if that land was developed as an inclusionary development, how many units could we come up with? And in Mount Arlington, we only came up with 5.5 acres of vacant land. And then we looked at, what could that create in terms of affordable units, and we came up with 20 affordable units. So that becomes what is called a realistic development potential. That means that's what you think you can actually create during the round 4 period. So Mount Arlington's RDP, remember our obligation was 60. We addressed 20 units through straight zoning, and then we had 40 units of what's called unmet need. And then we addressed that by looking at increasing density on an existing overlay zone that we had. So, Fair Share Housing Center and a lot of their challenges, they challenged probably every community that did a vacant land adjustment. So that makes it tricky, and they definitely scrutinize everything that you look at. But at the end of the day, it's still worth it because you don't have to try to come up with zoning for all of these. We were able to just sort of increase a density on a zone that we don't know if it'll redevelop or not, but it gives us a potential way to meet unmet need.
Right. And Jess, I think you see sort of the question that just popped. I think that's really probably the key difference, right? In an overlay zone, we're basically saying if anything gets built in this area, then the affordable housing will be 20%. If it's 5 or more units, the affordable housing will be 20%. But we're not saying we know we're putting 100 units here, of which 20 are affordable housing units. Whereas in a specific inclusionary zone and or redevelopment area, we're saying block 1, lot 1, 2, and 3, we are going to build a 100-unit project that has 80 market rate units and 20 affordable housing units. So those 3 lots are going to satisfy 20 units plus with bonus credits of our obligation.
Yeah, so an overlay zone is another way to zone an existing developed property, but it's not counted as, we can use it for unmet need, but we can't use it for our realistic development potential because it's basically a zoning over an existing developed area that's not redevelopment, but it does say if it redevelops, then we have a set aside. But if it doesn't redevelop, they're still able to continue on with whatever they're doing in the existing developed areas. So it's kind of a mix between inclusionary zoning and redevelopment. But if you have the vacant land adjustment, you can use it. I know that's a little complicated, but okay. So that we were able to take bonuses for certain types of units. The bonuses changed in the 4th round through the amended Fair Housing Act. Special needs were sort of 1-for-1 bonus credit. All of our other 1-for-1 bonus credits went by the wayside. And 3rd round, we had 1-for-1 for rental, which was a good bonus credit. For sale units developed with a nonprofit partner, you get a half a bonus credit. Units developed within a half a mile of a Garden State growth zone or a transit facility, you got half a bonus credit. Age-restricted units, half a bonus credit, but only up to 10% of your age restriction. So that kind of whittled that down. And then any extra units with 3 or more bedrooms, you could also get another half a bonus credit. So the uniform housing affordability controls, require 20% of family affordable housing to have 3 bedrooms. So if someone, say a developer, proposed 30%, you could potentially get some extra bonus credits for those extra 3 bedrooms. And here's just a sample of a fair share plan. It's Mount Arlington's, showing how we address the 20 units. We created what's called the Howard Boulevard Inclusionary Zone, which was within a half a mile of the train station. So we got bonus credits for that. So we had, 16 units there plus 4 bonus credits. And then we have what's called the PUD inclusionary zone, which is sort of a large planned unit development area that's already developed. But we did increase the density slightly on that to allow for, up to 40 additional units, which then kind of meets the 60, but the 40 is not guaranteed or as much of a realistic opportunity. And then you can kind of see how we had all the various, what we call micro requirements and in the bottom part of the table there. So more key milestones. We had any challenges to the municipally stipulated present and prospective fair need had to be addressed by February 28th. If there was no challenge, they were sort of presumed valid on March 1st. So, we really had between like January and March to figure out our obligation. And that was complicated if communities decided to present an alternate, basically obligation. And then the program was really supposed to decide any of those by March 31st, but we had them coming out in April and May. So it became a really tight time frame to try to address obligations, because we had by June 30th, we had to have our housing plan filed, not just approved, but adopted and filed with the program. So, you have to have a public hearing before your planning board. It's kind of hard to drop it on them like the day of the hearing. You want to talk to them about it before. Maybe you want to talk to the governing body too, because they endorse the housing element as well. So you need 2 meetings for that. So it was a really tight time frame in order to be able to meet this June 30th deadline.
Jessica,
Yes.
there was a question posed. Someone asked what was the origin of the 20% set aside percentage?
That's a tough one. We had sort of in the COA rules from way back when, like the round 2 COA rules, there was 15% and 20% set aside. So 15% was for rental, and the idea was to kind of incentivize rental before, I guess, it was as popular as it is now. And then 20% was for sale units. There was an amendment to the Fair Housing Act back, I think it was in 2022 or maybe 2000-ish, where all of any regional planning agency like the Highlands region or the Pinelands region, all developments in those areas were supposed to have 20% set aside across the board. So now that, a lot of communities are doing 20% across the board, Fair Share seemed to decide somewhere along the line, everyone should do 20% across the board, whether you're in the Highlands or Pinelands or whatever. If you have any restrictions, because I had them pressing on every community, and I said, hey, we're not in the Highlands, and they didn't really want to, hear that. They wanted 20% set asides on everything.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So then once you submitted your housing plan by June 30th, and all of these deadlines were, deadlines in the statute that said if you don't do it by the state, you lose your immunity. So it wasn't like a soft deadline, like this is what we hope you do. If you submit on July 1st, no big deal. It was pretty rough. Some communities did ask for and got extensions of that June 30th deadline. I think I only had one that got an extension, but a lot of them, they asked for extensions and they got denied. They said, no, we're not giving you extension. You still have to submit by June 30th. So that was the first, mad rush to get the obligation done, mad rush to get your housing element fair share plan filed by June 30th. And then we sat and waited for a couple months while anyone could look up our plan and decide whether or not they wanted to challenge it. So by August 31st was the deadline to challenge municipal plans. So just like the obligations, where anyone, I guess, any interested party, I'm not sure, how they decided you could challenge something or not. Maybe Matt knows, could, file a challenge and say you weren't doing what you're supposed to do. Your plan's no good. So Fair Share, in my opinion, seemed to challenge just about every plan out there. I think out of, and then various builders, people who had sites, they were the other ones that submitted challenges.
Yes, on the fair share challenges, I talked to other mayors where they got their challenge letter and they were cut and paste from other towns and they forgot to change the names. It was
Oh
just
yeah.
like a barrage of everyone's getting challenged regardless.
Yeah, it was a little crazy. I thought they honestly thought they would be a little more prudent in how they selected because we had to all do it all at once but no. They didn't.
It was interesting, right? Because it seemed like in a lot of places they challenged, but they weren't really challenging the number as much as they just wanted additional information. So it's kind of like they wanted a seat at the table, but it was, from our experience, it was almost always public information. Like just pick up the phone and ask us, or at worst, file an Oprah request, and we'll gladly send you the information. So I think for a lot of places, it just seemed to me like there were other ways to get there, but that's the path they chose. So we all responded and tried to figure it out with them.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was I guess annoying, I would say, because it was things like, we want all of your restrictions and deed restrictions sent to, it's like, come on, really?
Right.
It was a lot of crazy administrative stuff that they just wanted more information on. And here we are, in this mad rush with all these deadlines, trying to give them all this information, and they weren't even really able to process it in a lot of cases. Like didn't have time to read it. It was a pretty crazy process.
and at the end of the day, it costs the taxpayers money to pay all their professionals to do a chasing your tail information that's already publicly available.
Yeah, I always find that interesting. I mean, the administrative costs, a certain amount of it can come out of your affordable housing trust fund, up to 20%. But, if we didn't have to spend it on these things, then I presume you could spend it on affordable housing, So sometimes I wonder, like, what do it's odd that it's coming from the people who are promoting affordable housing.
And again, in the context of solving this problem via redevelopment, even if it's down the line, you're likely, or hopefully, I'd say, having the, redeveloper ultimately pay or reimburse for, their share of those costs.
Yeah, and that's a better scenario. So if there are no challenges, if you were lucky enough, I think I had one community out of 20 didn't get a challenge. So the program, basically reviewed your plan, and then, the judge issued compliance. Much easier process. You'd think there would have been more of those, but there really weren't. And then if there were challenges, we had to go through like a mediation process with the program, basically having settlement conferences. If the settlement conferences didn't work, then we had to do what was called a session, which is kind of like a judicial session, and the judge was then supposed to make a decision. And then after that decision, it was supposed to go to the Mount Laurel judge. And all of these were supposed to be done by December 31st, 2025. And I say supposed to be because some did, some didn't. I mean, a lot of communities, pretty much all of my communities did get settlements by December 31st. But some didn't, and we were still kind of going into January, February, and then it was like this black hole and you didn't really know what was going to happen. And then there are some, I read an article this morning that it said Fair Share said that out of the 440 some communities that submitted, 400 submitted compliant plans. So I guess that means maybe 10% are still sitting out there, not quite settled yet. And it's, unclear. Some of them have got extensions and things like that. So by February 15th of this year, we had to do unit and trust fund reporting, and every year to DCA. And I know Carolyn and I have worked on that pretty much we were doing it anyways, but we were So, keeping track of your trust fund, that's going to be something that, the CMFOs are going to be doing. Carolyn, if you have any thoughts or comments on that, we're learning, there's sort of a new program, but it's a lot like the old program that we submit to DCA with.
Right. I think that's, for my fellow CFOs on the call, and it looked like based on the survey, a lot of you don't have a lot of involvement, understandably, with this part of it. It's, the back end, if you will, of affordable housing and the rounds. But, as you all know, then we're here for when these when all this gets adopted, and now what? What are the potential costs? What are the hidden costs? What are the impacts? As some of the things that Jessica's touched on, with some of these zones, what's the impact on your utilities, on your infrastructure, capital planning moving forward? So I urge my fellow CFOs to read all the light reading that gets adopted by your governing body, because you want to familiarize yourself. There's the whatever the end result was, as Jessica said, municipalities are supposed to have adopted all the ordinances necessary by the 16th. So I would suggest that you familiarize yourself with them. There's the potential for these PUD units, zones, the inclusionary zones. There's redevelopment on your horizon, maybe perhaps pilot agreements on the horizon. The marketing plan, if you didn't already have one, your municipality has to have an affordable housing marketing plan. You most likely had an affordable housing liaison. That was a requirement in the past. You now have to have an administrative agent, a separate entity, as well. So, like I said, I as a CFO, I'm in a unique position as the administrator here, but I also sit on the land use board. So not only was I involved in these processes and working so closely with Jessica, I cannot thank enough for her expertise through all of this. But, and then it would go to land use. So I'm in a unique position of knowing more on the back end of what's happening. But as a CFO, my suggestion to all of you is, as these ordinances are coming out, in fairness to your governing body, as you're hearing, there were deadlines that they needed to get these things done. So there may not have been a lot of discussion with you along the way about the impact for moving forward. So again, my suggestion coming out of this is, see what your municipalities have adopted and acclimate yourselves to these ordinances and the potential costs associated moving forward.
Absolutely. Good advice. All right. Yeah, so as I said, we were talking about 424 municipalities, about 75% submitted housing element and fair share plans to the dispute resolution program. So from what I've heard, we're somewhere, it might even be up a little bit more than that, because I read, and as I said, I read online this morning, it was 440, so it might be a little more now. And about 10% of those might still be outstanding in terms of settlements. I personally had 19 out of my 20 plans challenged, so that was not unusual. And then we have some, those ones that are still sitting out there. As far as I know, I've gotten some extensions through April. And so the process going forward for them is really unclear. I don't know how those are going to be settled. They might just kind of morph into court cases. So far, I haven't seen communities lose their immunity. They've been granted some extensions of that immunity, but that could happen at some point. So I think Carolyn touched on this a little bit, what programs are now coming out of these housing element and fair share plans. We have inclusionary zoning, the redevelopment designations and plans, rehabilitation programs might be something that, all of a sudden you're being asked to, look at the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and provide funding and checks and payments for 100% affordable housing and low-income housing tax credit programs. Market to affordable programs, we don't see those as much, but they are permitted. It's essentially where a community buys a unit and then deed restricts it and then resells it, because the housing market is so crazy on fire. It's really expensive to do, so not as many communities are really doing that right now. You can also do gut rehab, which is similar, buying older homes and then rehabbing them, deed restricting them, and selling them. Also not as popular. Accessory apartment programs can be done, and then the extensions of controls.
And Jess, I would just, if you just flip back for a quick second, these two slides probably blend together, but I would say sort of for the CFO audience, right? Redevelopment designation and plans, there's pilot revenue opportunities there for the budget. 100% affordable housing, you're probably contributing to that project either by contributing land you already own, buying land, maybe via bond ordinance, and then contributing that land for $1, and or also contributing a per unit cost to help make that 100% affordable housing project happen, whether that's out of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund or otherwise. So that's maybe one that you look at as a cost issue versus a revenue opportunity issue. And extensions of expiring controls, same thing, right? Because you're going to pay the property owner to sort of keep those deed restrictions on for longer, although that's usually not a big number, relatively speaking, per unit.
Yeah.
Hey, Jessica, I'm just going to do the next polling question before we move on here.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, everyone should see this next question. Which document is central to municipal affordable housing compliance? All right, give it a few more seconds and I'll share the results. Okay. Thank you. Looks like most people are on track.
Yeah. Yep. So it is the housing element and fair share plan. Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so how are these programs funded? Affordable housing trust funds that we talked about, those development fees that get collected, payments in lieu. Some developers, it doesn't happen as much, but some developers, if they have a smaller number of units, might be able to just pay into your trust fund instead of creating the developments pilots. I'll let Matt talk about that a little bit. Low-income housing tax credits is also another funding mechanism. The State Affordable Housing Trust Fund, I hear they're running out of money, but they've been funding a lot of projects during round 3. There's always grants that might come into play. You might have community development block grants, other housing grants from state or federal funding, municipal bonding, and then general fund. So I'll let Carolyn and Matt, this is their bailiwick. Yeah.
Can I tee it up for Carolyn and Matt real quick? Because when that word pilot comes out, you know that the pitchforks come out generally around the state. And, I get the bullseye. So Matt and Carolyn have taught us so much about what the reality of it is versus the perception. A lot of misinformation that needs to be cleared up that Matt can really clear up. But, one of the things that you see, the first thing we hear is it's going to have a negative impact on the schools. The schools aren't going to get their money. Well, so there are 3 types of school districts: sending, local, regional. For most of the schools that are sending and local, that is certainly not true, right? They have their own governing body. They do a first reading of their budget, vote, second reading, public comment, vote. That budget becomes a bill. They give it to the CFO. Carolyn, she collects the money and pays the school, regardless of whether it's from ad valorem taxes, the pilot money, or as I like to say, a lemonade stand that we may run during the year. They get their money. And then Matt has really taught us a lot about the various ways the pilots can be negotiated. here, before that, we just thought it was one way. Yeah, Matt and Carolyn just wanted to tee that up a little bit for you guys.
Well, Mayor, I'll just jump in. I mean, great job, like hitting the most controversial topic maybe of the day with what 90 seconds left in our presentation. So I think what I would say, I mean, pilots, for those that maybe don't have experience, in lieu of paying conventional taxes, a project's going to pay a pilot. And unlike a conventional tax that gets split up, 20%, 20 cents to the municipality, 50 cents to the Board of Ed, county, fire district, et cetera, 95 cents of a pilot dollar goes to the municipality, 5 cents of the pilot dollar goes to the county, and that's it. Now, there's legislation out there every year, but even this year, that's sort of gaining traction that might modify that. But for now, you get a pilot dollar, and municipality keeps 95 cents, which is why it is a significant revenue generating opportunity for a municipality, even if the tax bill is less than it would have been under conventional taxes, right? Because 95% of $10 is more than 20% of, $8 or whatever the circumstance is. So, and then you add the property was exempt or it was vacant and barely paying any taxes in the first place. It's an opportunity. The school issue is definitely a sensitive one. It's a topic that you just need to work through with particular intention. A lot of the towns there's different circumstances, right? Some schools have significant declining enrollment, so adding 8 kids is not really a budget issue, right? Other towns have different circumstances. Different projects produce over 55 projects in affordable housing are not going to produce nearly the number of kids that, a non-age restricted project are going to have. So there are a lot of solutions through it. If you do have a pilot, the developer is going to come to you and say, I need the lowest pilot possible. Fact check that, vet that, make sure your side is trusting but verifying, because odds are there's a circumstance where there's a better opportunity out there to negotiate and get a higher pilot over a longer term.
Did you see there's new legislation where schools are looking to get a proportionate share of the pilot money when it comes in?
Yeah, I mean, that's the latest one. I think it's maybe Senator Singleton who has introduced that. And, I think if we are headed to some sort of sharing, maybe I understand that, but I think, and we've tried to work through the League of Municipalities to work with Senator Singleton's office, and I'm hopeful that we can continue to work cooperatively. The formula that it's very complicated, right? It's a number of kids per year based on a formula. It gets complex, but if you have a mixed use project, then it's just, I think, 5% or 10%, I forget what it is now, a straight number. I think in any circumstance, if we're going down that road, it should be a la the county, just something simple that everybody can implement. But yeah, that's out there. There's been other bills out there in the past. We can do an hour on whether or not schools are impacted, in what circumstances they are impacted, in what circumstances they're not impacted, and have that discussion. We get their budgets are just as hard this year as ours are, right? This is all the Nisivoccia people can talk, and all the CFOs know. This year's budget's brutal. Next year's budget's gonna be really hard. Schools are having the same thing. So I think everybody's just heightened to the fact that these are tough financial years that are coming.
I like that question on the tax appeals, by the way. Good point. Whoever put that question in there. Yeah.
I was just going to say, we've suggested a companion bill that they equally share in the payment of tax appeal settlements.
Yeah.
Good
Well, that
point.
was you.
Good point. I love it.
Yeah, that was good.
All right.
Any other questions?
So next steps, just to remind everybody, I know Carolyn, touched on this. You've got the annual monitoring. We're going to be working on area need of redevelopment designations and pilots, and site plan applications will be coming in for a lot of these zones, and you'll have redevelopment agreements probably crossing your desks. You'll be working on the collection of affordable housing fees and then all those other financial considerations that we've talked about. And I think that's it. We made it through.
Yay.
Yay.
I don't see any questions. So I think thank you guys for presenting.
Thank
Did a great
you.
job.
Hey,
John, I think
John.
we have-
Yeah, thanks
we
for the
have one more
opportunity. This was
poll.
great.
Thank
I had one
much.
last poll on this topic I'm just going to throw up for people to respond to now before we close out. And this one is, which of the following are often major factors that may affect your municipality's ability to meet affordable housing obligations? And you can check off whichever may apply. Thank you. That was great.
I've had several positive texts about your presentation. That was great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And John, apparently there's an island in Jefferson you could buy and go visit. It's right up your, I feel like that's right up your alley. Yeah, I know you were on like realtor.com as soon as the mayor mentioned that property an hour
Matt,
ago.
I think some people might buy that island just to put John on it.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, John.
He's used to it. He's fine.
You might see us still operating out there.
There we go. That's better. I like that.
Yeah. I think this is a trick question because I'm going to say all of these.
Right, pretty much all of them, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You see that in the responses. That's pretty accurate response, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great responses.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank
You
you.
got it.
You.
I think we're gonna take a 15-minute break so everybody can return the calls they've been missing and hit the facilities. We'll see you back in 15 minutes. Ready to get started?
I think so.
Because we have Mr. Brewer next. There's my 15-minute timer.
The only thing better starting 2 hours into a seminar after a 15-minute break is starting right after lunch.
Come on, they're waiting for it. So our next session or section is on the New Jersey Cyber Risk Management Fund, which is going to be led primarily by Adam, but Chuck Cuccia is also the treasurer for that fund, and knows some of the history as well. So we've already introduced Chuck, so I'm going to introduce Adam. What's funny is Adam's bio that he sent us was literally 2 lines. So I told him I would have to surprise him then. So Adam is the township manager for the township of Pequannock since 2018, overseeing all municipal operations, strategic planning, and combined multi-fund budget exceeding $35 million. He has more than 23 years of experience in municipal administration, previously holding a leadership role in Rockaway, where he worked under the late Mayor Datchison, who was very entertaining for him to work with. Prior to that was in West Caldwell with Mayor Joe Tempesta, where he also learned a bunch of new skill sets. And before that, he was the deputy manager under Frank Bastone. And most of us know Frank. He's been around for 100 years, if not more. Where Adam managed major capital projects, supervised large workforces, and secured over $7 million in grant funding. Adam is an active leader with New Jersey's Municipal Joint Insurance System. He has served as the chairman of the Morris County Municipal Joint Insurance Fund and as commissioner of the statewide, the MELGIF, where he currently chairs several key committees. I think he was very unhappy when I left and went to Bergen County because I think he inherited all of mine. He is also founding commissioner and fund secretary of the New Jersey Cyber Risk Management Fund. He holds degrees from Monmouth University and Fairleigh Dickinson University, and is also a QPA. What we also know about Adam is he's an avid Peloton bike rider. Tries to do it every day. He's an aficionado of cigars and bourbon, but he also enjoys reading historical fiction and taking long walks on the beaches of Ocean County. So, hi, Adam.
Hello, John. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for that extraordinarily long, unnecessary bio. Mine did end the same way, but it began in a much more simple fashion. I'll open with I'm the township manager, so I'm an expert in nothing. I did my best to create something to entertain some folks, but Katie Yank, who we all know Katie, she's the CFO in Montville Township, basically put the kibosh on all my material and said it was unfortunately offensive. So I checked with Julie McIver, the CFO in Pequannock Township, and she reminded me of an answer I gave in an interview once where they asked if I was competent with spreadsheets, and I simply replied that I excel. Moving on to the cyber GIF. As John mentioned, I'm involved in a number of the statewide GIFs, and I'm a bit of a GIF nerd. And Chuck was there for the origin of this. So if I mess any of this up, Chuck, you can just throw something from wherever you are and get me for it. The origin of the GIFs, as Chuck pointed out at the outset of this presentation, began with the inability of municipalities to get coverage. So there was no choice but to create what is kind of the ultimate shared service and meet a need that otherwise wouldn't have been met. And that was in 1985. I was 7. Chuck was involved. And from there, from there, there were a number. The Bergen GIF was first, and then there was a handful of GIFs that came after it. I think Morris was second, and the MEL was ultimately created in 1987. And then in 1994, the group created the RCF and the EGIF. All these are important and do a number of different things for the 600 plus entities that are members of the whole system. And the reason I mention the history is because with the emerging threats that cyber presented and the inability to find coverage, just as the same problem happened in 1985, in 2021, 2022, the same conversation began about how to deal with cyber risk and cyber management and cyber insurance. A task force of Mel commissioners was created. Mr. Cuccia was involved in that. I was privileged enough to be on that group as well. And on January 1st, 2023, the cyber GIF was officially created and moved forward. Like the EGIF, like the MEL, like the local GIFs that were created, it was designed to provide municipalities not only with insurance and the ability to file claims, but also to proactively manage risk. And as we all know from the regular EPL, POL programs or the EGIF inspectors, and I know I'm talking to predominantly a group of CFOs, there are a number of things that you may be aware of, you may not. I don't know. It depends on the size of your organization and how it's structured. But there's a whole lot of aspects of risk management that play into the approach that the funds take. So when the CyberGIF was created, it was essentially created to reduce cybersecurity risks through the implementation of best practices, which we'll get to a little bit more, provide an incident response program, and give members access to reinsurance beyond what was available. Initially, there was significant increases that were anticipated and experienced buying reinsurance on the market because the large insurance carriers didn't know how to handle cyber incidents. They didn't know if people had plans of risk management. Ultimately, at this stage of the game, I think our last increase was flat from the reinsurance perspective for the cyber GIF, and it allowed us actually to expand the programs and the services provided by the cyber GIF without any increase in cost. So if there's a question whether we're doing the job well, the market would say yes. Additionally, the folks that were involved, Ed Cooney from Connor Strong, Joe Rubosh from PERMA, have done somewhat of a national tour because not dissimilar to the MEL system, this is something that was never attempted before, much less accomplished. So the message across the country has been somebody figured out how to do this, and believe it or not, it came from New Jersey. Ways that the cyber GIF works to address the issues is training. For any of the members that are currently on the call that are in the MEL system, you've had to sit through the training, which sometimes seems a little arduous and boring and tedious until you get that goofy email and you remember to quickly hover over the link to see if it's actually a link or it's 75,000 characters long and says something strange. The training is important and it's effective. It really changes human behavior. When my emails are picked on or my email is spoofed, and I get 10 phone calls to my office. Did you really send me that email looking for 10 gift cards for $100 each? I know something's working when that happens. There are, as a component also of the ways we're accomplishing this, there's a 3-tier system that was established to rate municipalities with the carrot of decreased copays if there is a loss. So we have the basic tier, the intermediate tier, and the advanced tier. At various times as this was being developed, I was thinking it was the Cowboys tier, the Eagles tier, and the Giants tier, but then everything kind of reversed, and different teams did better at different points throughout the process. But it really, like the EGIF with the inspections that are taken where they actually go look in the drains in your DPW yard, it provided an opportunity for municipalities to look into their IT infrastructure and identify where they are and provide a roadmap not only to better loss, if there is a loss experience, it's also an opportunity to implement best practice and safeguard your operations. We have heard many times of working with a third party who provides a certain software suite, and when they set everything up, they left the port open, and then someone gets in through that port. That's the kind of stuff where when you review these things with your IT provider, then or your in-house IT, if you're lucky enough to have it, then you can really improve your operations so that the antifreeze doesn't drain out into the river, if I'm going to use the EGIF analogy. Again, memberships of the local GIFs have access to reinsurance. So if there is an incident, which is the last big piece, there's someone to call. Because as we all know, sitting there, and I'll pick on CFOs, doing your monthlies and your bank recs and your postings, you're not thinking, oh my goodness, what do I do if I get the green screen of you've been hacked, give us $5 zillion in Bitcoin, otherwise you're never getting your data back. It's not something that's necessarily at the forefront of your mind. So it does provide something for us to utilize if, goodness forbid, that should happen. In 2025, the losses in the United States for cyber incidents were measured in the billions. It's an incredible thing. If you think about it, who would click on these emails? Well, obviously somebody is. And as we all know, sending email is cheap. So if you can create a bot or something else that sends out lots of email that can trick people into clicking things, and then all of a sudden you get access to their networks or their information, it's hugely profitable with little invested at the outfront. They're often offshore, and it can be a nightmare not only for the operations of a municipality or a company, but for those people that interact with it, depending upon how much personal identifying information you might have within your files. The primary cause of cyber incidents really go to phishing and human error. And one of the things that's really becoming more evident is the implementation of AI in that process. Working before email was a thing was wonderful. Faxes had to be done, and at 3 o'clock you could just unplug it. But the emails used to be laughable. Everything was misspelled. Your name wasn't even correct. The spoofed email address showed up as something bizarre, and you saw immediately that it was an email that was a phishing attempt, and it was absurd. So it was easy to disregard and not fall into the trap. But now the ever-evolving use of AI and creativity and human engineering, bad actors are identifying who leaders are in municipal entities, whether it be a mayor, a CFO, an administrator, or a department head. They're no longer just sending ridiculous email. Now it seems almost possible, waiting on invoices. The project has come to this, you have to update this report. The advancement in this is getting scary. And it looks like your email address. And it almost sounds like you. So people are more likely to fall into those traps, which goes back to the training. Like I said, the third party testing and looking into whether or not they're operating themselves with your system is incredibly important. That's the number 2 area of frequency and cost of losses. Compromised credentials. If you take the training, that's the third largest and most frequent. We all know the joke about the password is password. You can't have that. As CFOs, internal control is kind of one of your mantras. So with respect to the regular update of passwords and whether it be tokens or multi-factor authentication, getting back to those tiers a little bit, and I'll touch on it more later, these are all the things that must be part of your regular operations. If you're working in an entity or working with an entity like a bank that is sending information in unrestricted email in the clear that could be intercepted and used by someone, you're ripe for the picking. So internal controls are not simply limited to you need the CFO and the administrator's signature on the PO before it goes out. It's got to be, now we're into a technology world that requires those things to be in place. Mr. Cuccia was involved with JCMI when the best practices for banking came into play. Everyone, I hope, is familiar with that. I'm not going to go into extraordinary detail because this isn't the webinar for that. There have been others, but payee positive pay. If you don't have payee positive pay in your organization, you're going to get got. We had an experience recently here in the township of Pequannock where someone whitewashed a check and it was immediately caught by the bank because of that safeguard. Perma, the administrator for the GIFs and the Mel, had an experience where, $900,000+ check, similar situation. Without these safeguards, those things become losses. And while we do have insurance, we'd rather prevent the loss than pay the claim. Chuck, anything else you want to throw in on that, just because you were one of the major authors?
Just to a little war story sometimes goes the best way. And if you're not involved with the cyber joint insurance fund, which this story is about me, prior to the formation of the cyber joint insurance fund. So in 2014, on Christmas Day, I get a call from my police chief who tells me that all of his records in the police department have been frozen. And the hackers want Bitcoin. So at that point in time, I did what any person would do who doesn't know anything about Bitcoin. I called my son, who was probably 20 at the time, and asked him what Bitcoin was. And I got the Reader's Digest version. Now we had to figure out how to buy Bitcoin, how to negotiate with the hackers, how to get it over to them and get it paid. That's one of the things that the Cyber Joint Insurance Fund is really good at. We have a team that negotiates. We have a legal team that provides the legal aspect of that and the notifications and whatnot. And we have almost like a third-party administrator that can actually purchase the cyber currency and make the payment when you have to make it.
And you always get the vendor. You always get the vendor certification on that, Chuck, right? When the
yeah,
when,
oh yeah,
when the
right.
police
You get the
deals it.
vendor certification. Yeah, they signed the purchase order.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of started us saying, how are we gonna do this on an ongoing basis? And it didn't make any sense to do it individually, which is where we started to talk about some of this stuff at the GIF level, because I was not the only one that had those kinds of experiences. And oh, by the way, it was not a breach from an email. They came in through my new camera system, which we put in for the police department, which uploaded police footage when the car parked in a certain spot. So Adam talked about the ports being open, very, very critical, because you have a lot of equipment at this point in time that accesses your network. So you've got to really be on top of that. And that's part of what the tiers are with regard to the Cyber Joint Insurance Fund. As far as the internal controls go, Adam mentioned the multi-factor authentication, but I always say that you beat high tech with low tech. So whenever we do anything that's got to do with wires or ACHs or anything, we always have a component in there that requires a phone call or a text, some other platform that contacts the person that you're supposed to be contacting, in order to either get the approval or make sure that the funds were actually transferred where they're supposed to be transferred. And we just use some of that low tech to make sure it works.
Yeah, and on that note, I remember John speaking many times about different venues when he was in Wharton that he would require a wire to have him physically present himself and present ID. And if the bank did not ask for the ID, even though they sure well knew who he was, he would give them a little bit of what for. So yeah, low tech sometimes is definitely a solution to the high tech. We're seeing things go back that way. I mean, check washing was a thing 50 years ago, and
old school.
And now it's come back. I often have the solid waste vendor request to pick up his check, and in Pequannock Township, that's a no-no unless you get authorization specifically for me, and it requires emails and other aspects to make sure things aren't being diverted, because the old internal control was, no, you can't pick up the check. It's got to go to the address of record. But now that's an opportunity for people to know that, waste haulers are getting large checks. So they're going to get targeted in different aspects. So back to the tiers and IT a little bit. I participated in a different discussion where we reviewed the role of IT in all of this. I don't know how many people interact with their IT provider who are on this call, but my recommendation is always that whoever is involved with your IT should kind of be a member of your senior leadership team. The person should be involved in not only making sure your printer prints, but capital planning, strategic planning in terms of the implementation of the necessary domains and separations between your servers and all the stuff that's required for compliance with the state if you have a police department with everything. So there needs to be a seat at the table for that person, because he or she really is important in recommending what can be done to save a problem. 25 years ago, 20 years ago in municipal government, IT was kind of a joke. If you went to the governing body with a request for $100,000 for something IT related, they laughed and said, "No, we need to do parks and streets and buildings and things that are appealing to the eye." Now, if you don't have a significant component of your capital budget dedicated to updating and maintaining your IT infrastructure, you're going to be ripe for the picking. Something's going to happen, and the loss is going to be much more consequential and costly than it would be had you had the IT provider, again, whether it's a department or division in-house or it's an outsourced group. They should be involved in the capital planning. They should be involved in the budget. They should be involved in periodic status updates to make sure that everything is going on. And as CFOs, you're kind of the rock of your organizations. You're the stability. You're the one that's able to say to the governing body the truth when the administrator's being a political hack just trying to keep his job. Also, with respect to the tiers, you have to review them to make sure things are right with you. I will be candid because I don't think anybody from the Mel or the CyberGIF other than Chuck is on this call. We in Pequannock Township do not have advanced tier. We have intermediate, and it was a conscious decision not to pursue advanced. There was a tool required that is called a PAM tool, and it manages who can download what on their computer. In Pequannock Township, no one can download anything on their computer. Everything has to be done with the approval of the IT provider. So my position was abstinence was better than something else. And unfortunately, that didn't qualify with the CyberGIF. So I would have had to spend a significant amount of money that with a year or two without a loss, I wouldn't recoup. So I decided from a cost benefit perspective, it was strategically better to approach it where I'm at now. So unlike, for example, the EPL POL checklist that someone in the organization is going to every 2 years go down and make sure you can check every box without thinking too much about it. We got to have the resolution, we got to update the personal manual, we have to have the trainings. All of that is perfectly logical, and I don't criticize anyone for achieving or pursuing advanced, but know what you're looking at. Review it with your IT folks. Review it with your chief administrative officer if you're not that person, in addition to being the chief financial officer. Have the clerk involved. Have other folks paying attention to this, DPW, PD, as Chuck mentioned, that there is significant loss. If you operate utilities, whether it be water or sewer, those are areas that are typically targets for bad actors in an effort to try to do harm to municipalities. So beyond just locking down MSI or Edmund so you can't process your purchase orders, you don't want somebody messing with the amount of chlorine going in your potable water supply. So which kind of segues into what do you need to know as a finance officer, or what's important for you? As I said before, CFOs are leaders in the rock in municipal government. I've always had that perspective everywhere I've ever worked. Arguably, they're the key position. Take it seriously. A lot of people roll their eyes at the training. A lot of people think it's a waste of time. A lot of people think, well, I've got 55 other things to do. This is number 56. If you take it seriously and you lead not only with your staff, but the rest of the department heads and the organization will look to you and understand that it's a thing of importance. Going back to those tiers of compliance, if you've not reviewed them, if you've not had a conversation with your CAO, again, if you're not that person, and your IT provider, I really think you should. I believe it's important to have an understanding of that and be able to participate in prioritizing what you're going to try to do and when and how. If you've never heard of payee positive pay, jump off the call and call somebody who has. All of these things will safeguard you, because we all know when something goes sideways, the first question is what happened and why. I'm familiar with a claim where a CFO who will remain nameless wasn't checking the balances of the accounts regularly. So a little bit was taken here, a little bit was taken there, a little bit was taken there. All of a sudden, a little bit was $6 million. You don't want to be that CFO that somehow lost $6 million. And you know, as we just said, banking, working with banks, yes, as we talked about before, interest rate is very important. Services are very important. Are you getting the check scanner? Are they giving you courier services? That's all something to pay attention to. But if they themselves are not engaging in the necessary practices to safeguard your money and the interaction with you and your money, then perhaps it's time to find a better bank. We went through a process for the entire Mel system of doing an RFP, and Chuck was more of a lead on this. I inherited it at the back end. But without naming names, there were some practices happening where people thought the multi-factor authentication was 2 email. Well, if you've already got the 1 email, chances are you're going to get the 2nd email. So that's not necessarily the best way to confirm the validity of the wire transfer or whatever other activity is proposed. So again, conversations, participation, stay vigilant, be a leader, and don't be the one who has a claim, which is what I'm going to conclude with. Go ahead, John.
We have a comment here that the rating agencies are also asking about our cyber preparedness. And it becomes a factor in your rating. They don't advertise what we do, but they do want to know that we are actively being trained and taking action.
And if you're on a rating call and you report the activity that you're engaging in as a result of participating in the CyberGIF, if you're in the Mel system, they will likely be awed, because it I'm going to say exceeds anything other municipal governments are doing in the country, and maybe even private industry. But in the bad situation, we all have that, oh, you know what moment. If you do have a claim, communicate. First thing to do is identify, what happened and do your best to isolate it. Uh, I would probably do the goofy thing and run and pull the plug out of the wall for the Cat5 cable. I don't know if that would have a positive effect or not, but that's something that I could see myself doing if goodness forbid it happened. Then you need to engage in triage, right? So you need to engage your IT provider. You have to notify the necessary people. You have to notify your joint insurance fund. As Chuck mentioned earlier, there's a process that the CyberGIF engages in, and immediately there is a breach counsel that's assigned. These are attorneys that deal just with this issue. Between the breach counsel and the forensic IT people who will come in and try to ferret out exactly what happened to ensure that you're safe. That's kind of the first team that comes in. So you'll have to notify the GIF. They'll give you an agreement that will satisfy what you need to do individually with your entity and that breach counsel, as well as those the forensic provider. Services all supported by and paid for by the CyberGIF, depending upon what deductibles you may have. Then the analysis begins of what happens, and sometimes it takes months and even in excess of a year to truly get to the bottom line of what happened. And then the recovery process. We all want to get back up as quickly as possible. If you are an entity that retains PII or personal identification information, you have extra responsibilities there. And if you do have PII and it gets breached, there are going to be reporting requirements. And there are a number of attorneys who are seeking class action suits against the disclosure of this information. So you may then have a secondary lawsuit you're going to have to defend because of the breach that took place. And obviously, of course, it all goes back to, in addition to the internal controls for you as a finance officer, backups. If you're not having your data backed up off-site in the cloud in various ways and times, again, that's a good conversation to have with your CAO, your clerk, for records retention. If that's not happening, the recovery process is almost impossible. Nobody wants to lose a day of activity, but loss of a day of activity is much better than loss of a year of activity. So Chuck and John, that's kind of what I have to say about the CyberGIF. It's been an interesting ride building the plane as we're flying it, but it seems to be working.
Just one cautionary note to the CFOs. Go back and take a look at your banking requirements with regard to the internet systems that you use. I mean, the simple things like making sure that you're not allowed to wire money overseas. If you don't use ACH, shut down the ACH process. There's a bunch of little switches that you can turn on your banking system that will help you in the long run.
The ounce of prevention versus the pound of cure.
Mm-hmm.
So I know Derek's got a topic left, and I was told to keep it as brief as I could. So hopefully I've satisfied the requirements from Nisivoccia and Mr. Reinhardt.
Hey, I also have a couple polls I was going to say, John. Go ahead.
So no, launch a poll now while we keep talking. So one of the other ones that the bad actors are doing is sending you an email that their mailing and banking information is updated. Don't respond based upon that. Russ, call back the original contact you have. So if you call back the original person, find out if that's true. We're finding it's not.
It's like the age-old, please update my information in payroll. Don't send my paycheck to this bank account anymore. Send it to that bank account. If you don't have a requirement in your organization that someone has to physically present themselves and sign a form, you're again right for the picking.
Right. If you publish your bills list online, they might now know who you bought your router from, who your largest payments are. So that's who they're going to target, those people, those vendor profiles.
You guys should see those results.
Oh, actually, that answers the other question why people didn't know about JCMI.
Right. Mm-hmm. Not a member.
Yeah, and just to note that you can only become a member of the Cyber Risk Joint Insurance Fund is if you are in another joint insurance fund.
Hey, did you have one more polling question?
Yes, we do have one more. I'm going to throw that up now.
going back to one of Adam's earlier comments about how AI is getting more involved and we're seeing fewer typos and your name is now spelled more correctly. One of the other things that we're hearing is on top of that, AI can change your voice or adapt to your voice. So if you have videos out there that you put online or a YouTube channel and you're speaking in it, somebody can pick up AI voice if they know who you are, and they could call you up and request as you payment information or whatnot if they're one of your vendors. And if you know them and you're only hearing their voice over the phone, that could, we could start seeing interesting things like that where it's no more just the email, but it's actually contact over the phone from a bot pretending to be a John Reinhardt. God, we only need one John Reinhardt, but imagine that if somebody spoofed John Reinhardt's voice and then starts calling you as him. It could lead to a lot of issues. So that goes back to the multi-factor authentication. Maybe if you're not seeing where the number's coming from, you give John Reinhardt a call and say, hey, did we just have this conversation? Because it's unusual. It sounds unusual. Anytime that a red flag goes up in your mind that, this is out of the course of normal business, that's when you should be thinking, hey, this could be something that I'm being spoofed on. So let me get a second factor here and then give them a call.
Great. I don't think we have any more questions. We had a couple of comments.
I think I get to set the record number for polls.
Because you only sent one question in.
And no one can guess which question that was.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks again, Adam and Chuck.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Chuck.
Thank you, guys.
We're moving on to our final topic, grants and grants management. This one is being led by Derek Macchia. Derek serves as the CFO for both the Township of Bedminster and Independence Township, where he oversees all municipal finance functions, including budgeting, accounting, trust accounts, payroll, and benefits coordination. He manages several dedicated municipal funds, such as the Open Space Trust Fund, Recreation Trust, Affordable Housing Trust, and Construction Trust. In addition to his CFO responsibilities, Derek provides consulting services through PERMA for the Metropolitan Health Insurance Fund and the RCF, supporting financial operations. I believe he's working with Chuck on that one.
Yes, sir.
He is a certified municipal finance officer with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, concentrating in accounting from Montclair State University. His prior experience includes serving as a CFO and tax collector in Chester Township and Victory Gardens, further strengthening his expertise in municipal finance reporting and operations. Derek is recognized for his strong command of New Jersey municipal finance system and his commitment to transparent financial stewardship. Derek, I believe you also started Nisivoccia as an auditor.
Yes, that is correct. I believe I was there, if I remember correctly, 9 years.
And he has recovered nicely.
No, it definitely was helpful coming from an auditing background before I came into the finance position, because it gave me a lot of insight into how I wanted to basically run my office and structure my controls, because I've been doing the other side of it for so long. So I do appreciate that opportunity and how much it's contributed to the benefit of my career. So
It was yours.
okay. Am I able to share a PowerPoint from myself? I think I can, correct?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay, just give me 1 second. I just want to run the slideshow, and then I'm gonna figure out how to share my screen. Let's see, share. I believe this is the one I want to share. Is that working?
Looks good.
Okay, so let me just see if I can, won't let me pull it over to the screen. All right, so my presentation today is going to be on grants. Wanted to start off a little humor. Everyone always says grants, it's free money, or is it not worth the hassle? Start off by saying that nothing is free money. Even when you get a grant, somebody's paying for it. The money's coming from somewhere. But that being said, grants are a phenomenal tool to be able to help you manage your budget, be able to help control some of your costs by looking at other ways of funding various projects that you're going to do throughout your municipality. There are different types of grants that you can get throughout the year. The primary two that most municipalities are familiar with are going to be the federal grants that you get either directly received through the federal government, such as like the Bulletproof Vest Grant and the AFG grant, which is the Assistance to Firefighter Grant. Some other ones are also pass-through grants to the state of New Jersey. Some familiar ones would be like the Drive Sober, the Click It or Ticket, similar grants of that nature. Your state grants, you've got a lot of recurring grants that I believe almost all municipalities receive to some extent, such as clean communities, recycling tonnage, and if you have a police department, usually the body armor replacement fund. There are also some non-recurring grants that you can get for specific purposes. One example that we received in Chester Township when I was there was a community parks improvement grant. It was like an earmark in the state budget for us to be able to improve various facilities within our park system. Those are usually not recurring grants. You have to specifically request or go out for them every year, and you're not always guaranteed to be able to receive those grants. Lastly, not a lot of people think of these as grants, but you've got your local grants, which are typically your targeted donations. Sometimes you'll get like a donation to the police department or the LEAD program. That is those donations, I tend to run them as grants. That way I know that they're in my grant fund and that they're going to run perpetually until the funds are fully utilized. You also have foundation grants. Now, these are grants that are going to come from sometimes third parties. They're not as familiar to some individuals. You usually have to go look for them. One of the ones that I was very familiar with was in Chester Township, we had the Firehouse Subs grant, which if anyone's ever been to Firehouse Subs, it is a sub shop that specializes in sandwiches, but they also make a lot of contributions to local fire departments. Well, doing some research, I found out that as long as you're within X number of miles of the Firehouse Subs, you are eligible to apply for the grant. The grant was not that difficult to do. It was a one-page application, and they gave you, I believe it was $1,500 to use towards your fire department. Not a significant amount of money, but every little bit helps. So I'm always a big advocate of always pursuing any grants of this nature that can help out your municipality. The other one that we were able to successfully get was the grant sponsored by Coca-Cola called the Keep America Beautiful. It provided trash cans and recycling cans to our park systems. And because they had two different versions of the grant, they had one where it would include advertising for Coca-Cola, but they had another one that was specifically targeted for municipalities that removed that advertisement and just simply said, Keep America Beautiful. So again, that was a simple one-page grant application saying we need X number of recycling and X number of trash cans, applied for the grant, was able to successfully receive the grant. Your grants usually come in two different types. You've got your reimbursable grants. These are the grants that you typically have to expend the grant funds first, and then you're going to draw down the funds later. Depending on the size of the grant, these reimbursement grants can have an impact on cash flows. So it's very important that you manage those drawdowns and try to be on top of them so that you're not going a long period of time without the funds in your account. Some of the bigger ones, like the Assistance to Firefighter Grant, they are a reimbursable grant, but there is a provision that you can typically draw down the funds usually right before the expenditure is about to go out. Usually have to work with your FEMA coordinator to make sure that you're timing it right. You don't want to wait too long to draw down those grants, but if you're going to draw it down up front, the federal government definitely does not want you to hold on to those funds and have them sitting in your bank account. They're going to want to see that what you drew down was immediately used for whatever purchase or project that was funded through that grant. The other type of grant that you can get are payment upfront grants. A lot of municipalities are going to be familiar with these. They're like the clean communities, the recycling tonnage grants. Those grants come in They go into your bank account. Sometimes they come in before they're even in the budget. So you would have to do a Chapter 159 resolution for them. But for those grants, your expenditures are reported after the fact, usually through an annual statistical report or a filing report. You want to watch those, because failing to properly report or follow the grant requirements, there's always a possibility that the municipality would have to return already expended funds. And you really don't want to do that, because it's going to cause a negative impact on your fund balance, and it's going to make your auditor not too happy with you, because they're going to have all these technically expenditures without an appropriation. You don't want to do that. So with these payment upfront grants, you want to keep a very close track on what you are allowed to use them for, and make sure you're tracking your expenditures as you go. Grants are typically offsetting revenue and appropriation lines in the budget. One exception to this would be is if a grant has a cash match requirement, the cash match portion will not have an offsetting revenue. Some grants that require a cash match, you may not see until later in the fiscal year, well after you've adopted your budget. It may be in your best interest to budget additional cash match funds for a potential Chapter 159 that could come later in the year. One of the best examples of this is we would get a supplemental municipal alliance grant in Morris County. It was a grant provided by the county, but it required a 50% cash match from the municipality. The grant was not always guaranteed, and the award letters typically didn't come until September, around August or September. So I always made sure that I budgeted that cash match in my adopted budget, and then when the county grant was awarded, I would only have to do a Chapter 159 for the county portion. I already had the cash match accounted for in my operating budget. One of the best things about grant appropriations is that they are budgeted outside of the cap, including any cash match requirements. This is good because I don't know how other municipalities are dealing with this year, but we are running into a lot of difficulty with the caps because of the increase in costs. You've got CPI at around 3.3%. But the reality is we're seeing a lot higher on certain types of expenditures, particularly like your energy and utilities and things like that. So any appropriation that can be budgeted outside the cap is very helpful to the municipality. The grant fund is usually accounted for in the same bank account as current fund. I do know a handful of municipalities that actually operate a grant fund separately, but what I've seen mostly is that it's run through the current fund, with the difference between the grant receivable and the grant appropriations being accounted for as an interfund with current fund. That is something you're going to always want to watch out for, because interfunds receivable in the current fund will restrict your fund balance. So you have to keep an eye on your grants. So if your grant receivable balance exceeds your grant appropriation balance, this will cause an interfund receivable in the current fund, which could restrict your fund balance. That's why it's very imperative that any grant receivables are pursued in a timely manner to mitigate this potential fund balance restriction, especially at year end, where you're going to be reporting it on your financials. Another best practice that I have for these grants is that I highly recommend that you do not commingle similar grants with different budget years. This gets very messy when you go to do your grant reporting later on. Usually for the grants like the clean communities or the recycling tonnage, they want to know specifically what you spent those funds on by grant year. So I always use a different budget account line item to separate the grants for reporting periods. It's definitely easier for reporting, and it helps you to account for your cash match requirement on a separate line item, because when the grant is done, if there's any unexpended portion of the grant that is actually a cash match requirement, when you go to cancel that grant, that cash match is going to come back into your operating budget as operating surplus, and it will eventually fall out to your fund balance. So always a good idea to keep a separate accounting for those line items. And I lost my slide. Uh-oh. Sorry, bear with me. Technical difficulties. I lost my slide. It is Katie. I'm sorry. My PowerPoint is not running. Would you be able to load up the one that I sent you?
Yes, let me just pull that up. 1 second.
Sorry about that.
No worries. It's all
This
good.
is why I do a test run at home, and it worked great at home. And as soon as I come here, it's not working. See if I can get
So
that.
Derek, to your point earlier about grant receivables, and we see that a lot where there's some older grants receivable that haven't been collected in a while, and sometimes with the changeover in CFOs in towns, it's pretty hard for the succeeding CFO to go back and investigate those.
Where is the? I had additional slides. I don't know what happened to it. And the whole presentation seems to be missing, and I don't know why that is. I do apologize. I'll just go on without the slides at this point. Some of the other items I wanted to talk about were typically your grant management, which is typically when you apply for a grant, depending on the size of the grant, you may want to involve, you definitely want to involve your department heads, because depending on what grant you're going after, you're going to need information that you as the CFO may not have readily available. One of the grants that we went after in Chester Township, and we went after it multiple years, was the Assistance to Firefighter grant. It is a highly competitive grant. It is multiple pages. I believe the grant application was about 22 to 25 pages, and it required a lot of statistical reporting and information that I did not have. With those grants, you definitely want to form either a small group or a small committee to be able to manage that information and make sure you're reporting the most accurate and up-to-date information. For the Assistance to Firefighter grant, we were actually successful in obtaining it for an ambulance for our first aid squad, but this was the third year that we had to apply for the grant that we became successful on it. And each year that we went through the grant process, we were learning. These are areas that we could improve. These were narratives that we wanted to work on tweaking to make sure it really accurately reflected the information that would give us the best chance of scoring well on the grant and receiving the award. And with the AFG grant, we were very happy to discover that we received the award for the ambulance. But once you get the award, everyone thinks that's great. We've got the money. Here's the grant. We're ready to move forward on the purchase. And for grants of this size, it's not always that easy. One of the first things you have to do with especially a grant like this is they expect to see an award resolution. So we had to immediately adopt a resolution accepting the grant and making sure that we had the 5% cash match that the municipality, that the federal government required from the municipality. Now, the AFG grant for us came in, I believe the award letter came out in October. And we had budgeted a cash match, but we never expected to receive the full amount of the ambulance. So when it came time to do the 5% cash match, we did not have it in our line item. And so what we ended up doing was, because of the timing, our next meeting was the first meeting in November, we ended up doing a transfer to the cash match line item to be able to ensure that we had sufficient funds to accept this grant award. So we were able to adopt the resolution. We got it to our FEMA representative, and then the next step was they give you about a 2-year turnaround of grants of this nature. So we had to have the item in hand and ready to pay for it within 2 years. Now, anyone who's bought a large piece of equipment like an ambulance or a fire truck knows that the build times on these can sometimes go out multiple years. So right off the bat, as soon as the award came in, we were under the clock. We had to get this item in before the grant period was up. So in a case like this, if you're going to go after a grant for a big piece of equipment, it really helps to make sure that you know exactly what type of equipment you want to buy, and also know where you're going to be buying it from. With an ambulance, the one thing we saw was that there were really no state contracts available to purchase an ambulance. There were federal co-ops that offered them, and that's ultimately what we did. But buying off a federal co-op is not as easy as buying off the state contract list, because there are certain requirements. And again, I would defer to my QPA on this, but there are certain requirements and procedures you need to do in order to be able to buy off of a federal co-op. Luckily for us, we had all of this in place before we even applied for the grant. So as soon as the grant award came in, as soon as we adopted our resolution, we knew specifically what type of vehicle we wanted. We were able to reach out to a vendor that worked through one of the national co-ops, but was located in New Jersey. And we were able to get our order in, I believe it was within 60 days. So from the time that the grant was awarded to the time that we placed our purchase order for this ambulance, only 60 days had passed by. And that really maximized our chances that this ambulance would come in before the grant period is over. Speaking to our FEMA representative, there was a process that if you had ordered the vehicle, but there were delays in manufacturing that were outside the municipality's control, you can apply for an extension. And typically those extensions are granted in those types of situations. Unfortunately, I'm not with Chester Township anymore, so I was not able to see this grant through to its completion. But before I had left, we had placed the order, we had the purchase order, we had the ambulance in the build status. The last step was just making sure that we comply with all the reporting requirements, which is that you have to provide a progress report to the federal government every 6 months. In the beginning, as soon as you place your order, that progress report is, I don't want to say simple, but it really is. You're just basically telling them we're waiting on the item that we ordered. There's not much update you can give beyond the ambulance is in the build process, and we will be making the purchase as soon as it is delivered to us.
Hey, Derek.
Yes.
There was a question. Where do you budget the cash match in the recreation budget?
In the recreation budget?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the recreation budget, we never had a recreation budget. We only had the recreation trust fund. So we didn't ever encounter a situation where we needed to budget for a cash match in the recreation fund. All of our cash match usually were within either the current fund or the utility fund. So we would always budget for it out. As I said, we would budget for those outside the cap. And if I knew the grant was even a possibility of the grant coming in later in the year, I would usually try to make sure I had enough cash match to meet that grant later in the year. As in the case with the firefighter grant, we didn't have enough given the amount of the award that they gave us. So we were fortunate that with the timing, we were able to do a transfer from inside the cap to outside the cap, because if anyone remembers, you can always go from in to out, but once you're out, you're out. So we were lucky enough to have some unexpended funds inside our cap, and we were able to move that over to the cash match requirement. And then we were able to do a Chapter 159 for the FEMA grant and move the entirety of it over to our grant fund. So one of the other items I wanted to talk about, and I know it's going to affect almost every municipality here, is that one of the biggest grants that municipal governments in New Jersey have gotten in a long time, the American Rescue Plan Act, is coming to an end. Any unexpended grant appropriations, I mean, everything had to be encumbered by December 31st, 2024. But the federal government gave a 2-year window between when those funds were encumbered and when you had to expend those funds. That deadline is coming up at the end of this calendar year. So with the American Rescue Plan, you definitely want to make sure that you are on top of any outstanding encumbrances you may have to make sure that they are fully expended, checks cut, and expended prior to the end of this year. Anything that is, now my understanding is anything that is unexpended by the end of this year is subject to recapture by the federal government. And it is definitely not something you want to run into. Really, there should be no reason why you're holding on to encumbrances for 2 years unless it's for a very particular type of purchase. But even with that, again, keep an eye on your clock, keep an eye on as you get closer to the end of the year to make sure that when you run your budget account transaction trail for these grants, you're not showing any any encumbrances that have not been paid. And then the other big part of this American Rescue Plan grant is, and again, this goes for any grant that you will be working on, is you want to make sure that you're meeting all the records retention and the reporting requirements, because once the grant is closed out, it is still subject to being audited at any time if the federal government wanted to come in. And if that were to happen, you definitely want to make sure that you have copies of everything that you've done for the grant. It may be that you keep your purchase orders for the 6 years or longer, but if you're buying something for the grant, I always recommend that you create a separate records retention for all grant-related purchases, invoices, canceled checks, anything that could possibly come up as far as a grant audit. You want to have that somewhere separate from all of your other financials so that is readily available to you. You're not suddenly going to a box upstairs in the closet and trying to find a purchase order from 5 years ago. If you have a folder, and if you have the possibility of scanning these documents in, create a record so that if and when this happens and someone says, I need to see copies of these purchases between these days, you can go right to your grant folder and everything that you did for the grant is accounted for in one location.
Hey, Derek, I'm just going to do a quick poll if
Yes.
that's okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. This one is a true or false. Grant revenues always equal grant appropriations in the operating budget. I'll share the results in about 30 seconds. Okay, thank you. Should see the results. I think this one was false. Is that right, Derek?
That is correct. It was a little bit of a trick question because of the cash match requirement.
Okay.
Some people don't consider the cash match to actually be the grant, but I've always treated it as one thing. If it has a cash match requirement, the cash match will always be slightly different from the revenue side.
Thank you.
Yes. So back to the American Rescue Plan. After the grant closes at the end of this year, there will still be one more reporting period for the small municipalities. That reporting period is going to be the one time a year that you always report your ARPA funds, which I believe is going to be April 1st. The grant reporting period will open on April 1st of 2027 and will close on April 30th. That should be your last report that you're submitting for the American Rescue Plan. And you definitely want to show on that report that you have fully expended your funds, but that you fully expended those funds by no later than December 31st of 2026. So just a couple of little cleanup things with grants as you go into your budget cycle this year. I don't know how other municipalities have saw this right now or other CFOs have seen this, but with a lot of the federal grants, we've been seeing a delay in being able to access and draw down our funds. As various agencies within the federal government have either been with limited staff or have been temporarily, I guess, shut down, it has made drawing down funds from different agencies more difficult than it has been in the past. And again, that goes back to the whole grant receivables versus grants you've already expended. You don't want to have your grants receivable hang out there for that long, but at the same time, you're limited by the agency that's providing the funding. So it's definitely a good idea to stay on top of those grants receivables. And as you go into your budget cycle for 2026, if you are anticipating any federal grants make sure that you know how you're going to be able to draw down those grants so that you don't run into a fund balance situation as you get to the end of this year. Also, when you go to submit your budget, it is imperative that you have a grant award letter, simply because a grant was earmarked for you in some kind of congressional spending or state budget is not going to be sufficient enough to be able to put that grant in the into the grant section of the budget. Bedminster Township is one of the unique communities in that we host the President of the United States on a regular basis. He comes out and actually lives in the township for roughly about 6 months of the year, depending on how long he wants to stay. In the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there is a specific carve out for providing police protection and emergency services for when the president comes to visit. That carve out is not enough for the municipality to be able to put that into the grant fund. The state has informed us that we do actually need an award letter to be able to account for this grant. So unfortunately, in the prior 2 years, because the One Big Beautiful Bill was not adopted until later into 2025, Bedminster was essentially forced to budget for those police protection services inside our cap in our general operating lines. And as anyone can understand, when you've got a very large appropriation like that, it really can take away from your cap balances and your ability to stay within your appropriation cap and your levy cap. So if you're going to be using federal funds, definitely want to make sure that you can include it in the grant section of your budget. So at minimum, it is outside the cap and it won't affect your levy. And then you definitely want to make sure that you are drawing down your funds fast enough that you're not restricting your cash flows and your fund balance. So I think at this time, and watching the clock, I'm pretty sure I stayed within my window. So I'll open up to any questions that anyone may have. I do have a copy of the AFG grant we were successful on. Be happy to share it with other municipalities that continue to go after that grant. Again, I can't guarantee that what I did is going to work for you, but at least it would give you a good template to look at and maybe give you some guidance on, if you're going to pursue this grant, what you may or may not want to do.
Hey, Derek, one of the things I'm going to ask you, in working with grants, we were seeing a lot of our towns get New Jersey Department of Transportation grants over the years, since the sales tax went up, and now we're seeing that money come in. I was working with a client yesterday talking about funding ordinances with the grants. What kind of experiences do you have with funding an ordinance, a road project through an ordinance with a grant, knowing that you're going to have to wait for that as it's a reimbursement to come back in after the project's complete? What's your experience with that at this point?
Well, we've typically always did that. When I was in Chester Township, we always funded our ordinances, and we always did a separate standalone ordinance for any DOT grant that we receive. But one of the things I was adamant about is that as soon as you have your grant award, and as soon as you have your engineer draw up the specs for the project that you are doing, one of the first things I would always do is go in and request the 75% up front, so that we weren't constantly chasing a receivable for the entirety of the project. This allowed us to control our cash flows, and so that at the end of the project, we were really only pursuing the differential between what we drew down up front, which was the 75%, and whatever the balance of a project was. If we were able to fully expend it, at most it would be 25% of the project. And in instances where we didn't have enough cash in the capital fund, whether there was just no residual funds sitting in capital improvement fund or fund balance to kind of bridge the gap between when that money came in, at worst case scenario, I would advance temporary interfunds to the capital just until those funds came in.
Gotcha.
But when I went into one of my municipalities, one of the things, I believe this was in, I think it was in Hardwick Township. There was again, John, you might remember from years ago, there was one of the grants is that I guess They did not report all of the expenditures correctly to the grant. They had closed out the grant project. They had gotten the grant receipt, but they expended more than they had received from the federal government. And in that case, if that were to happen, any portion of the DOT project that was expended in capital that was not funded by the grant automatically becomes a deferred charge unfunded that you will have to raise in either a subsequent year's budget. And that is something you don't want to have happen because, again, that puts a restraint on your budgeting process for the next year because suddenly you're chasing down something you expended that you never funded. So if you are going to use your DOT funds in the capital as a fully funded ordinance, you definitely want to make sure that you're going to get everything that you expended. You don't want to spend money that is not going to be reimbursable under the grant.
John, I've seen it where they do a bond ordinance and mention the grant. So you have the ability to get temporary financing, and then as the funds come in, you extinguish your deferred unfunded. Which is probably, if you've been shorted before, you have bad experience, it's probably a safer way to do it.
We have authorized debt related to DOT projects, but we've never had to issue it because I was always able to bridge the 25% either through an interfund or just through my cash reserves. And we're fortunate that we have very good engineers that as soon as the project was done, we were drawing down that final piece of the DOT grant so that we could close out the ordinance as soon as it was done and there was no outstanding receivable that we were chasing. But again, that comes down to the diligence of staying on top of these. If you don't pursue them, those receivables can hang out there for a very long time.
So we have, he did it as a question, but it really sounds more like a statement. But the cash match can be in the form of either cash or expenditures or in-kind services. Doesn't always have to be a cash match.
Correct. Certain grants will have, usually some of them will have a combination of both. The Municipal Alliance requires a 25% cash match as well as a 75% in-kind contribution. We never typically budgeted for the in-kind because the in-kind is not a direct fiscal responsibility. It's more to demonstrate that you are covering that in-kind through actions that you provide, like if you're utilizing municipal space, volunteer services, things like that, that all counts towards the in-kind. But the cash match is a hard number, and that was something I always made sure I budgeted for ahead of time.
I've got another one that's more of a statement. It's an aggressive statement too. It's funny. Grant receivable management should follow same collection practice as any other revenue. Clock starts ticking the moment the reimbursement request is submitted. After 30 days, follow up, push department heads to follow up with the respective grantors. Accept no excuses from the grantors. Don't be afraid to use your respective legislators to follow up as well if there are very serious delinquencies.
I like that statement, but you are at the behest of the grantor. So you can put pressure on them. You can definitely follow up. You can be aggressive in your pursuit, but ultimately it's up to the grantor to release those funds. And as I've said, I've had very good experience in being able to collect all of my grant receivables. I haven't really run into a situation where we weren't able to collect what we had, at least at minimum, what we had expended on the grant. But there have been times that we've run into delays, and usually it's been things outside of our control.
Okay.
You know, one of the things I'll tie in, I know if you've been on these webinars before, sometimes John Reinhardt will give you the year-end closeout, do this, do that, checklist of what you should be doing to have clean records and all. When do you, or John or Derek, when do you typically say, okay, you know what? A receivable has been on the books long enough, probably not going to collect it. Time to, take it off the books, or same thing with a reserve. Because I personally have some clients that have some pretty old reserves that are just sitting there, and there's a refusal to take them off the books because we might be able to spend it at some point. Okay. So we just put the recommendation in the report and we move forward, or the management suggestion. But do you have a time frame that if you haven't spent the money or received the money, it's time to go?
I try to keep my grants under the same, even though you're not required to, I try to treat it like the current fund where I've got a current year and a reserve year. Usually I'll keep a grant on the book. If I know the grant's done and what we received is what we've expended, and there's a portion left in grant receivable and grant appropriation that's the same amount, I will cancel that as a cleanup resolution in December. But if they're out of balance, either way, usually after the second year mark is where I will start to really look at them and say, what is the likelihood that we're either going to get this grant receivable, or I'll go to my departments and say, can we still spend this residual funds that are left over? And if so, what are you going to spend them on? Other than certain grants that you're allowed to set aside a portion each year, a good example of that is the Clean Communities Grant. You're allowed to put 25% aside for a capital purchase, and you're allowed to accumulate that 25% over multiple grant years. I know some municipalities, especially with the stormwater requirements, have been looking at acquisition of either a new or used street sweeper, which can be a very sizable purchase down the road. And if you've been planning ahead for this purchase, you've been putting, theoretically, you could be putting 25% of your clean communities aside to go towards the purchase of that piece of equipment. In a case like that, if I know why the money's still sitting on my balance sheet, I'll leave it there. I'm not going to touch it. I know it has a purpose. It's going to be used. I'm not as concerned with that. But if I have an appropriated balance and we've already received all the funds, I don't like to leave it on my balance sheet for too long. I want to get it cleaned up. And then I always make sure that if I'm going to cancel it, that there's no repayment requirement. The last thing you want to do is to cancel an appropriated grant balance, send it to your fund balance, and then find out, oh no, I'm supposed to turn that back over to the agency. And now in the next year, you're going to have a hit to your operations account, because now you're going to have to expend those funds back to the grantor, and it's in your fund balance. That's the last thing I would want to tell my governing body.
Good.
We have some more. Be careful of grants that are one time and then the future years on you, like the COPS grant, right? They've got some that have strings and then requirements.
That is a big one for me, is that I tend to not want to balance my operations off of grants. Even the most recurring grant always runs the risk of either being scaled back or completely removed in a future year. We have a grant that we have been receiving ongoing in Independence Township that is called the Safe and Secure Community Policing Program. It is a grant that helps supplement our police budget. The grant amount has gone up and down slight amounts each year, hasn't been a big impact on our budget. This year's budgeted amount is equal to last year, so that was good for the municipality. However, as soon as they made the awards for this year, the next thing they informed us was that due to insufficient funds in the state budget, that Safe and Secure Communities Grant Program is going to be cut 25% next year. That 25% can be a sizable amount depending on how much you're getting from the agency. Fortunately for us, it's not going to cause a fiscal impact that is not manageable. But again, if you're using that grant to supplement your operational expenditures, you want to be prepared to cover those operational expenditures if the grant is ever going to be scaled back or removed. You don't want to be caught in a position where in the next budget cycle, you now need to raise all of these inside your operating budget and you have no mechanism to do that because it would push you over your caps.
I think we should just invite Rob Micus in because he's on fire today. His next one is grantors may issue official closeouts, although not always. In those instances, I go ahead and issue my own closeout to the grantor so I have documentation for it. So that's a statement. Actually, at the New Jersey chapter of Prima seminar that we had yesterday, one of the people presenting was a grant writer that has their own system that prompts them to contact their clients with all the reporting requirements 60 days ahead of when the report is done, which is a nice service. Rob again is regarding the SEFA and CISA, SEFA and SESA for grants involving matching funds. Be sure that the actual grant expenditure you're reporting are in agreement with what you've submitted to your grantors. They will check and flag any discrepancies and try to jam you up. Rob, are you done? Any more? All right, I see no more.
We had one more poll. Sorry, Bud. Go ahead. I'll launch it while.
No, I was just saying I like these comments.
Yeah.
I'm just busting his chops.
This last one is, how confident do you feel in your municipality's grant management process?
So John, you posed a question about how often or when do we bail out? We do an annual review of all of our grants. Being a county, we have hundreds and hundreds of grants. And they pass over several years. So we look at the date, and in our account structure, we know the year that the grant was given to us. So when they start to age out, we really scrutinize and we close them.
Yeah, you guys also want to be careful of the term of the grant, right? You don't want to be expending funds outside of the grant period so that you have unallowable expenditures.
Thank you.
Some more popped up. That's Elke Yetter says, I feel great about our grants because Rob is in charge of the reporting for them. That's good to know.
Yeah.
All right, I think there's done with questions. Derek, thank you for presenting.
Thank you.
Derek, you did get a shout out from Colleen Lapp. She was waiting to hear from you.
I know Colleen very well, yes.
Great.
Hey, Katie, you're in charge.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you, Bud, John, and John. Sorry, Bud, I missed you in the intro for leading the discussion. It was another great set of presenters and conversation today. So thank you also to our attendees for joining and participating. Before you head out, just want to let everyone know there will be a survey that will open in your browser at the end of the webinar. Your feedback is incredibly helpful to us, and it also lets you indicate which credits you need for today. So we'll also include that in our follow-up email if you don't see it today, as well as the recording of today's session. So we will send that all to you next week. Keep an eye on your inbox. And with that, Bud, John, any closing remarks?
It's actually, we have a bunch of new people on here. You want to explain that the CEUs will come a little later?
Yes, the CEO certificates will gather all the follow-up surveys, gathering everyone's information, and then send those out within, I would say, 2 to 3 weeks. We have a department at Nisivoccia that will issue those once we get everybody's survey for credit. So timeliness is important here. Thank you all for completing the polls. But yes, as John said, we'll send those out from us to you in a couple of weeks.
Just saved me a whole mess of phone calls.
Trust me, you're right, because my inbox starts getting them too. So it is tax season, so our admin department is busy, but we will get them to you. And thank you all.
Thanks, Katie.
Great day.
Thanks all the
Thanks,
panelists.
everyone.
Appreciate it. John, you guys also did a great job as always.
Nice to see you, Derek. I haven't seen you since you left Morris County. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, we just got a thank you from an attendee. So thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Got
Take
it.
care.
All right, bye.
Take care.